I hereby call to order this meeting of the King George County Board of Supervisors Budget Work Session. Do we have any amendments to the agenda, Mr. Kusenberry?
Yes, ma'am. There is a request to move item number 6, FY22 budget challenges, up following public comment.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, I'll now open the floor for public comment. Is anyone here in the audience for public comment this evening? Seeing none, Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online for public comment? All right, then I'll close public comment and we will move on per the amendment to fiscal year 22 budget challenges. Mr. Kusenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give Mr. Dines a couple of minutes to get the slide on a projector. Thank you. Go back one, Chris. There you go. One thing I had in my PowerPoint, I was going to start the PowerPoint to talk to the board regarding some challenges that we were facing this year as we were preparing the FY22 budget. Of course, I think everybody's aware of the challenges from COVID that we faced in the current fiscal year, and we continue to face we don't know when that's going to end, but it's going to extend into next fiscal year. We discussed at a previous work session the reduction in landfill revenue, and that we don't see a large growth in landfill revenue over the next few years. At the last work session, public safety, the sheriff and the fire chief discussed the problems with public safety recruitment and retention, and the fact that if we can hire anybody in fire and EMS, we train them and then they go take a higher paid job after 6 months. We also had a presentation at the last work session regarding the increases in social services budget, which is over $1.3 million. The county is growing. The county has not added new positions in several years, and most all departments are stretched very thin. So we're looking to add some new positions in the proposed FY22 budget. Of course, the schools, you'll be hearing from the school superintendent tonight regarding the schools budget. In the current year budget, the county balanced the budget using a significant amount of money from its reserves, the revenue stabilization account and the general fund balance. And that amount exceeded $3 million. So we all understand why that happened. There was so much uncertainty last year when the budget was prepared, but the county cannot continue to do that. And that's not sustainable. We discussed the increases in the regional jail and the juvenile detention department. I have the cigarette tax on here. We expect that to be a good revenue source, but that is a challenge, how we effectively deal with that revenue and where that revenue goes. In the current fiscal year, the county was very generous and gave employees a 2% raise, I think in January. Well, that raise was not covered in the fiscal year budget, and the cost of that raise was covered from the general fund. In the proposed budget, I'm proposing that county employees be eligible for merit increases. And it's been many years since the county had a merit increase program. They've been given small cost of living increases. I'd like to go back to the merit increase program. And one other challenge has been a new budget team. The three of us sitting here at this table that's worked putting this budget together, we haven't been together very long. So that has been a challenge. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Questions from members? Mr. Granger, I see no. Thank you. Mr. Stonehill, Ms. Bender, Mr. Bush. And from our citizens? No, Ms. Thompson? Okay. Mr. Chapman? No? All righty then. Let's go ahead and move on then.
The next item on your agenda will be a presentation from King George County Schools.
Welcome, Dr. Benson.
Maybe. Good. Thanks very much. Okay. So I appreciate the opportunity again to come to you. I know that each year the school board has an opportunity to approve, review, and approve a proposed expenditure plan year. And of course, we then have the opportunity to come to you to present that, given the funding scheme that Virginia uses to fund schools throughout the Commonwealth. So I want to briefly just tell you what I'm going to tell you this evening. First, the outline for tonight's presentation. I'm going to explain to you the contents of the binder that I provided. I have provided several documents in that binder. I want to go through that to make sure that you understand why those documents are there and how they can be useful to you to account for every penny that we planned in terms of expenditures. So I'll take some time to do that. I want to review with you the development process that we go through. It's a very collaborative process. It's a zero-based process. I want to make sure that everybody knows and that I utilize this opportunity to show our community that we go through quite a process, and we want to make that process transparent to our citizens so that they know where their taxpayer paying dollars are going. So every penny is viewable. You can track it, and we want to be good stewards with the funds that we do receive, because we know, as Mr. Cusenberry just showed, we know there are many competing challenges and needs that our county has. Next, I want to summarize for you major cost differences between the current fiscal year and next fiscal year. I'm also going to give you an explanation of the positions that are needed to transition our sixth graders from the current elementary schools, 3 throughout the county, to the newly renovated and the new addition to the middle school. So I'll provide a listing of those positions. And then I also want to conclude, or lastly, I want to conclude with a comparison of this current fiscal year to next by appropriation unit and in the aggregate, so that you have a big picture view of what's being asked for, where it's being asked for, and how much is necessary to meet needs for next year. Steins, thank you. So with that said, if you'd be kind enough to go ahead and reference the binder. You have a binder. Last couple of years, we've actually just provided electronic copies of the documents, but I want to make sure that you, and I know we have several new members of the Citizens Committee, have an opportunity to have the documents and be able to go through the documents. So if you'd be kind enough to open that up, the very first tab is simply a copy of the presentation for tonight. So you're welcome. I didn't know if everybody would be sitting in front of a screen or could see, so you've got a copy of the presentation for your reference. The next tab is labeled Revenues. This document we put together to provide a description of the different types of revenue that help support the schools. And so you will see, I'm not going to go through this document in detail. I'm sure that you can read it at your leisure. But it does provide you kind of some background as far as the origin of the funding. And then what we project on the third page, you'll see what we project for this coming year, for next fiscal year, in terms of the revenue that should be coming to us and the difference or the increase or decrease in those revenue. I'll again reference those in my presentation, but I wanted to make sure you had this document. It provides greater detail than what I will summarize for you in the slide presentation. The next tab is called the budget book, or this is really our line item budget. This includes personnel costs as well as non-personnel costs for every agency within our organization. So you have every line item and you have the amount associated. So this includes salaries, benefits, VRS, contributions. It also includes the non-personnel costs, contracted services, supplies, equipment. All of that is included in this document. It's rather voluminous and it's somewhat monotonous to just read through. And without some context, it's kind of difficult, which is why I want to take you to the very next tab. Next tab is called the Budget Builder. Okay, this is a document we use internally to plan all of our expenditures by department and by school, non-personnel expenditures throughout the division. So this is an internal document. Principals, department heads, myself, we all utilize this as a working document where we list out what we project is needed as from a dollar standpoint, but it also lists how those dollars are planned to be spent in the next fiscal year. So I've put tabs in there this year for you. If you can go back to the budget book, and you'll see, hopefully you have a little tab out to the left. And that tab is pointing to a line that I think is highlighted. Okay, so that line gives you a code. It gives you a funding code. And those of us who deal with this on a day-to-day basis, we're familiar with funding codes, but these codes basically allow us to track at the local level. And then when we ultimately then are accountable to the state, we report the spending that we've done, as does every school division, up to the state. And they're able then to aggregate all of the expenditures statewide using these different codes, okay? So the code that's highlighted for you there is from our special education department. It references purchase services. So these are services that we plan on purchasing and then utilizing to serve our students next year. And then out to the right, you'll see the amount that's planned, and you see $314,000 or so. So without any more information, that's kind of a difficult, well, what is that going for? What are we using $314,000 to do? And so what I would do is take you to the next tab in the budget builder. Should be the same pink tab. And you'll see that that is pointing to a line that has the very same funding code. Okay? But you'll see underneath of that, that funding code is then exploded into the various expenditures in greater detail that ultimately add up to the $314,000. Okay? I think that's important. This is also going to be posted publicly so citizens can do the very same thing. I think it's good that there's full transparency. These are the planned expenditures for next year. Without this document for non-personnel costs, you'd be left kind of guessing, well, what are they going to use that money for? We don't want that. We want our community, we want you all to know, here's what we plan on using the dollars that we hope you're able to afford and support our school division this coming fiscal year. So that's an example. I wanted to walk you through and give you a little practice so that you saw how you can use the two documents. For any of the codes in the budget book that are non-personnel, okay, this is the stuff. For any of the non-personnel codes, you can reference in this document in the budget builder, okay? So I hope that proves helpful to you when you review this and you may have questions. Certainly I'm available. If you have questions that you don't see that need clarification, I'm happy to help you. But I think that would save us time this evening. I don't need to go through every agency. You'll have the opportunity to then look at this as you need to do. Okay, so that is the binder. Those are the contents of the binder. Next, Mr. Dines, if you would. Great. Next, I want to take you into the process that we go through. Each year, we utilize a staff survey, and we use it for two primary reasons. First, we use the responses to evaluate how effective the previous year's budget was. So you're going to see in a moment the prompts that we ask each of our employees. And based on their responses, then we know how well the budget that we developed ultimately performed in meeting the needs of our employees as they serve our students. Secondly, we use it certainly to gather input as far as how we can improve. What did we miss? If you didn't feel as though the funding that was afforded to you as a teacher or as a para or as a bus driver helped you to do your job, what did we miss? Provide us commentary so that we can utilize that commentary to continuously improve our budgets moving forward. So with that said, let me go. Those are the two primary purposes for the annual survey that we use. Mr. Dines, next one. Very quickly, I'll show you that as far as participation and the different positions that participated, the pie chart provides for you a visual representation of who responded. We had 266, which is close to half of our employees respond to the survey. We did have a good cross-section of the different employee groups represented in the survey responses. Next slide, please. That was position. I think the next one will be location. There you go. And so now you can see that these are where the employees that responded. There was, but so you'll see we had employees from all of our schools. We had central office, transportation, as well as preschool employees respond to the survey. So we want to check that to make sure that when the results come in or the responses come in, they're not heavily loaded at one location, one level. So it's a good check for us to make sure that before we infer from the results, we have a good cross-sampling of people responding. Next slide, please. So the first prompt deals with equipment needs that our employees have. And we simply ask them that the equipment that you need in order to fulfill your job is another aspect of the budget. Equipment are generally defined as items used repeatedly for more than one school year. And we ask them to respond to the following statement. I have available to me the equipment needed to fulfill my responsibilities. And we do ask that if they check disagree or strongly disagree, we ask that they provide commentary to help us understand why they feel that way. And again, we use that to then try to make it to improve the next time around. So you'll see the results there that of our employees that responded, 91% either strongly agreed or agreed that they had the equipment necessary. So I think this is the first year we've had all three of the prompts you're going to see in the 90s. So I do believe that it does help us to continuously improve our budgeting process and ultimately the performance of that budget to help deliver the services our kids need. So the next prompt deals with supplies. Next slide, please. The prompt is worded the same way. It simply refers to then supplies. And we define supplies as items that are generally used as they're single-use items, or they're consumed within a single school year, as opposed to equipment. Here, again, we had a very high, 96% of respondents either strongly agreed or agreed they had the supplies needed to do their job. Next slide, please, Mr. Dines. Lastly, we asked them about programs and services. These are services that we subscribe to or programs that we utilize to then, again, deliver instruction or administrate the school division, depending on the employee group. Apex we use as an instructional delivery software. We use that as an example to give our employees context so that when they respond, they know what this is referring to. Again, in this category, when prompted, we had 96% of our employees say that they strongly agreed or agreed they had the programs and services needed to fulfill their jobs. So I wanted to highlight that survey, those results for you, because we feel strongly the budget has been performing well from year to year. We began maybe 5 years using this, and we were in the 80s with a lot of these responses as far as strongly agreeing or agreeing. So we have continuously improved, it seems, based on the perceptions of our staff. The second, I want to reiterate that we also use it in terms of the commentary provided. We use that commentary as it comes in. It's a Google Doc that's shared with principals, with department heads, as they are building the draft budget. They're reading what's being said by our employees so that they can use the commentary to better target needs for the upcoming year. It also helps so that we don't duplicate requests. You know, we can all see in that budget builder document in the back of the binder, everybody sees that in real time. And so we're all able to check each other's work to make sure we can limit any duplication within our proposed budget presentation to the school board. Next slide, please. So now that you have an idea of the system and the process that we go through to build this budget to ultimately get it to you, I wanted to take a quick minute just to review, particularly for our Citizens Committee and for our community, how schools are funded in Virginia. I think this is often overlooked or not understood. And it's an important factor because I know that we have competing interests in the county. So we all understand, I believe, we have a perspective of how there are competing needs within the county. I'm not sure we have a full perspective in terms of how the Commonwealth of Virginia has both statutorily and in practice set up the way schools are to be funded. So very quickly, this graphic is from the Virginia Department of Education. You can reference it by the link I've provided up top if you'd like to go there. But this is just one slide in a presentation that talks about funding related to the standards of quality. And standards of quality are set out by the Virginia Department of Education, and the General Assembly has impact in terms of the standards of quality, where they define both through basic aid and through other SOQ areas how much state funding should be afforded to each school division throughout Virginia. And so very quickly, the way they do go about this is they take the variables that are listed kind of in the arch bubbles up top. They use those to add together all of the cost components, instructional positions, support positions, non-personnel support, and then they deduct from that the federal revenue, which is another revenue source for schools. They deduct the federal revenue that's related to support costs. So they withdraw that because federal grants come to us, most come to us annually. There are some federal grants such as the CARES Act funding. We anticipate this next round of funding in terms of the Rescue America grant. You know, there are one-time grants that sometimes come to us as well, but typically most of the federal grants come through different titles through the ESSA legislation. But all of that is added together. They deduct the federal revenue. They determine a per pupil amount for each of the SOQ accounts for each division. That then is multiplied by the projected enrollment, or as they refer to it, the average daily membership, ADM, to determine the total cost. What is a fair estimate based on the SOQs? What is the fair estimate of the total cost that a school division would need at minimum to run a school division? Now, a quick asterisk here, there is no school division in Virginia that operates on what then is defined. You know, please understand that this formula serves to equitably distribute funds, but it's often criticized because it's outdated, quite frankly. You know, every locality in Virginia, every city council, every board of supervisors is providing more fiscal effort than this formula in the end would suggest. And that suggestion at the end is also a term called required local effort. You'll see that in places. But that said, I think the next part is why we're here tonight, and that is from that total cost, they then subtract sales tax allocation in the case of basic aid, and I'm moving to the left of the chart as you look at it, and they apply what's called a local composite index. This is a 4 decimal number that each locality is assigned based on their local wealth. Assessed property, the tax digest, sales tax. You know, there are factors that are used to calculate a local composite index, which is unique to every locality in Virginia. That is the multiplier. Conceptually, what is supposed to happen is the local composite index, when calculated, is supposed to, again, provide equalize for all local school divisions and create a partnership between state funding and local funding to the tune of about 55% of the burden should be with the state and 45% would be with the locality. Now the dollars will obviously be different because you've got different multiplier for each locality. And that's how they try to provide some equity across the state of Virginia. Similarly, on the right side of the chart, other SOQ accounts that are utilized to determine the funding, they also are multiplied by the local composite index to try to then provide a dollar amount that represents, again, in concept, represents that 55 to 45% partnership. Okay, so we're here, it's very important that we're here together tonight because you see those yellow ovals, that's really what we're looking at, that local share and the proposal the schools is making. That's what we're trying to fulfill in terms of the fiscal obligation our locality has to support schools, all predicated on the funding scheme Virginia uses for every school division. We are not unique. Every city schools, every county schools, they're all going through this very same process because this is how Virginia has chosen to fund their schools. So thank you for indulging in that. I hope that's helpful to bring some context. It's also helpful for our community to understand how schools are funded. Next slide, please, Mr. Dines. So not long ago, as we all know, the General Assembly concluded their budget work out of conference. The budget has gone to the governor. And so throughout this process, we've used different calculation tools. We've used the proposals from each of the House and the General Assembly. Actually, we began with the governor's proposed budget in December. That changed when each House created their own budget. And it changed again most recently when each House rejected the other House's budget, but they came together in a conference to come up with a compromise budget that has gone to the governor. So everything you hear this evening is going to be based on that budget, the most recent that has gone to the governor. Based on that budget, and using a projection of 4,380 pupils in ADM, well, that is the very same that we used this year. I'll just put a little asterisk on that within the governor's budget, there is a hard harmless section that will, for all divisions in Virginia, will ensure that the funding is based, any loss of ADM or enrollment next year will not impact the school divisions. So we're thankful for that. That was a big ticket item in the budget, one that I think was a prudent step for next year, given the uncertainty currently. But anyway, with that said, you'll see then a comparison between the current year, FY21, and next year, FY22, and the difference. You'll see right off the bat, King George County is slated to receive just a little bit more than $2 million in new state revenue, which is fantastic news. I'll take you quickly back to the slide we just looked at, and remember that whenever the state then ponies up additional revenue, it predicates or almost implies for every locality then that the local share or the local contribution is to work in concert. You know, that 55-45%. If you keep any localities funding where it is, but yet you increase the state, then obviously you increase that that gap between that partnership, that 55-45. So it is good news that the state has supported several things that I think have been long in coming. The difference in revenue from the state for us will be just over $2 million. We expect no difference as far as any other state revenue. And again, I'll refer you to the revenue document for a description of these different categories in greater detail. Our federal grants should remain relatively the same, a slight decrease. All other revenue, and of course, except for the local revenue, remain the same. The local revenue request for next fiscal year would be an additional $1.3 million. Again, please keep in mind in the context of the state revenue increase, and I'm going to go into a couple of things that the state has provided that revenue to support, which will hopefully make more sense as to why that additional revenue is needed for next fiscal year locally. Next slide, please, Mr. Dine. So there are three main categories where there are additional expenditures or increases that are apparent. The first is compensation, and not unlike what Mr. Cusenberry presented in terms of fire and rescue, you know, we too must compete with other school divisions to retain our employees. We also compete to attract new employees when we have vacancies. And so we need to be able to compete with other localities close by in particular to make sure we are attracting and retaining quality employees to work with our children. So the compensation increase for our employees that's being recommended is the very same as was approved by the General Assembly. The General Assembly approved a 5% increase for teachers. We have always applied that increase to all employee groups and not distinguish between teachers and bus drivers and that type of thing. And the school board very much wants to keep that consistent across employee groups. Secondly, we've been very fortunate to not have increases in our healthcare renewals, and then subsequently the premiums for our employees. However, this year we did receive notice that there's a 3.75% increase. That's a median increase across the different plans for renewal. That increase has been split between the employer share and the employee. So please keep in mind, even though we're recommending a 5% increase, there is a portion of that that will be, unfortunately, for those who are participating in the health insurance, there is a portion of that that they'll have to then apply to their monthly premiums. Secondly, we do have some increases as far as equipment, services, and consumables. And again, you can reference all of those in that budget book, or the budget builder rather, using those funding codes. Some of the costs for renewal of our programs, there's inflated costs, or inflation has begun to take hold, so we've realized increased costs there. But based on the budget builder and what's been compiled by staff, that is the difference from current fiscal year to next fiscal year in terms of equipment, services, and consumables. Before I get into the additional staffing, I do want to take, because it does relate to the equipment, the services, and the consumables. We fully, and we discussed this at the school board, or I brought it up with the school board Monday evening, because I think there are some who would say, well, if you've budgeted based on what you believe to be a normal year, in other words, students in school, that these supplies and consumables would certainly be needed. And that is our intention. I said the other night that we've gotten good news in that our transmission at the elementary level, we've had students in for more than a month now. We've had 0 to in most cases none in terms of any transmission between students or staff. We've had a few symptomatic cases, but fortunately they've not turned out to be COVID related or the source of any transmission. We've had one situation, but really that was with athletics, where we did have some transmission and we did have to do some extensive quarantining and tracking. But that's good news. I think there's further good news this morning. I was sharing that I thought the news about the adolescent study, 12 to 15-year-olds, and I believe it was the Pfizer vaccine being 100% efficacious is exceptional news, because we can hopefully then have the majority of our students in that age group then vaccinated prior to the fall. So all that said, the school board, no doubt, we have all struggled with, what is the best thing to do? How can we move forward safely? We intend to go 5 days a week next year, all day, just as we did in the good old days. We are hopeful that our families will choose to send students back. We will certainly continue to use the mitigating factor in terms of the mask. We will distance to the extent possible, but I was very candid with the school board saying that, if we hope, and we certainly do hope, that more than 90% of our families choose to come back, that may encroach upon the 3-foot distance. However, we'll keep the mask, we'll keep the plexiglass, all the other mitigating factors we've installed in place. And my hope is we will attract our students back. For those who that's just not their cup of tea, we will certainly work with them as we need to in terms of a remote option. I certainly understand we have some families, we have some students whose physical needs or whose medical needs may require that we accommodate them in a way that's not traditional. But at any rate, I wanted to make sure that that point was made not only to this board, to our citizens group, but to our community, so that the budget proposal we are presenting makes sense. That there's not a question about, well, if we propose this budget, but we don't go to school, or we don't have schools open, do you really need that level of funding to make school work? We anticipate 5 days a week, all day, students coming back. So I just want to make sure I hit that up front. Next, speaking of students in school, we appreciate greatly the support, and we have a brand new, beautiful addition, and we have upgraded our middle school facilities tremendously. It's not been without a little flexibility, and the staff over there has done a tremendous job kind of going with the flow as we got through that renovation. But it is very nice. We want to arrange an opportunity for everybody to take a tour soon so that you can see that. The ultimate goal, or the end game, of course, is to try to create in King George County a true middle school configuration, 6th grade through 8th grade. That'll certainly provide increased opportunities for 6th graders from a curriculum standpoint, access to advanced math classes, to advanced courses, access to middle school extracurriculars. So it's an outstanding step that we can provide a facility of that quality, and we can truly create a 6-8 configuration at the middle school. It'll also have benefit to the elementary level. We'll be pulling the 6th graders out of the elementary school. And so that will create space that we can backfill at our existing facilities. And I think the added benefit is that we can delay until perhaps none of us are in this room the day when we need to build a fourth elementary school. We wouldn't have that need right away. So I think throughout, and I know Mr. Cuseberry and I work closely on the design of that. I think it's a great day, and we appreciate your support and allowing us to transition those sixth graders. With that transition, however, understand we have sixth graders right now who share a PE teacher, let's say, at the elementary school. So 1/6 of that PE teacher deals with those students, or I'm sorry, not 1/7 if you got kindergarten, deals with those students. So when we pull the sixth graders into the middle school, we can't peel off 1/7 of a PE teacher from each elementary school to bring them to the middle school. And middle school, PE is a popular elective. We want to increase elective opportunities for our middle school students. So that is an example of why it's not as simple as, well, just take all the sixth grade teachers and move them to the middle school. There's a good number of the sixth grade teachers who will certainly be transitioning to limit the number of new positions we need from the elementary school, obviously. That said, you have a listing here of the King George Middle School expansion, the positions that are needed to make that successful. I've mentioned the health and PE teachers. We have 4. We would need 2 additional for the sixth grade, a male and female, preferably in those positions. Art is a popular option in the middle school as far as an elective. We'd want to add an additional art teacher there to accommodate our sixth graders. Band and music education at the middle school, again, very popular, very successful. We would need a teacher there to accommodate our sixth grade students. In our CTE department, we want, and this board has talked, I think, jointly with the school board at times, about how can we increase CTE offerings. This is an opportunity to engage our sixth graders earlier. We currently have a half position there that we'd like to make full-time. That's why the half, and 1 additional position for CTE offerings. A media specialist and media center paraprofessional, these are one of those SOQs. So the state has included additional funding with the intention of us and every school division in the state being able to provide the amount of support necessary in a media center as is needed for those students. So that is an SOQ related position increase. Gifted resources, again, we serve our sixth graders in terms of gifted services. Now that they would be coming to the middle school, we are looking for someone to part of their day to continue to serve those students in terms of gifted services. And we also would like to have that person work with math in particular, be a math coach for our staff and for our students who are in particular need to make sure that they are on grade level and successful. From a special ed standpoint, we are going to need a learning disabilities teacher to address special education needs with those sixth graders that are rising. We need a reading teacher. And then lastly, from an administrative standpoint, we'd like to add an assistant principal. We only have 1 there. And then the custodian addition, given the square footage increase, the obvious square footage increase, now that the renovation is complete. Lastly, there are 2 central positions that for the last 2 years we have deferred. We cut those 2 years ago, but we have learned we are in need of additional support, in particular the Director of Administrative Services position, that was Mr. Turner when he was here, and reinstate the Communications Coordinator position that we had to cut. We anticipate next year will continue to be challenging in terms of logistics. Already we're hearing word of testing possibilities or schools piloting testing in the school. And obviously this year brought about a need and revealed a need that we had in terms of communication, that position would really help us. So both of those have been recommended in next year's budget. Next slide, Mr. Dines. And actually, I think you can, yes, this is simply just a repeat of what I just summarized for you. So if you're kind enough, Mr. Dines, go next slide. Okay, so in the aggregate, I thought you know that we are appropriated each year by appropriation unit by the Board of Supervisors. And so I thought it prudent to give you a crosswalk between this current year and next year of the amounts in each of those appropriation units. So you'll see instruction, this includes schools, this includes the vast majority of our expenditures, but schools, special education, that's why it's so heavy in terms of the amount. So instruction from this year to next year, you see the increase there. Technology, second appropriation unit, administration, health, and attendance. That is really the administrative function. Again, these titles are state developed because they track expenditures across these appropriation units for all school divisions in Virginia. Transportation is self-explanatory. Our operations and maintenance. This includes our utilities and of course maintenance on the facilities themselves, and then facilities. So that said, I think it's important, and I highlight this with the school board each year. At the bottom, one of our final gauges at the macro level is of our operating budget, our Fund 250 budget. You'll see there that the total cost for this current year is $46,310,805. The proposed for next year is $49,645,767. What we look at is what percentage of that amount is local funding. So for this current year, the local funding amount is $17,545,574. As a percentage, that represents support in the amount as a percentage of 37.9% of our operating budget is supported locally. Next year, even though the amount has gone up, that $3 million, you've seen the source of that. $2 million of that was state revenue, was new state revenue. So we again want to look at this. Well, what are we asking? We're coming to the Board of Supervisors. You know, is what we are asking for as a percentage of our operating budget, is it reasonable? You know, does it fall closely in line with the previous year? So you'll see that while the local funding has gone up, it remains close to what, as a percentage, this year's fiscal funding really equates to. So that's a metric that, again, we use to try to gauge to make sure that the request in dollars, while it could be very different, we want to make sure that we're on par in terms of the percentage effort needed to make next year work. Next slide, please. So I'll sum up by, again, reiterating that, highlighting that the materials you have in that notebook can help guide you in terms of specific questions you may have about specific expenditures. It's all there. All the personnel costs, all of the non-personnel costs are there. And again, with the non-personnel costs, you have additional resource in that budget builder to further clarify the planned expenditures with those dollars. All that said, we want to be very transparent. It's all there. We think that's important for you all, for our community. I believe we've been great stewards of taxpayer funds that we've received to put to use. We have an outstanding school division. And when I say we, I'm not talking about just the school division. These are our schools as a county. It will be forever and ever. We want them to be of quality. We want our students to thrive. And we appreciate your support in helping us to make that happen. So with that, I'll close. Thank you, and be happy to answer any questions now or to future. I'm not sure what your plan is in terms of future work sessions, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Benson. So if you can remain at the podium, because we will entertain questions, but first I do want to recognize we do have two school board members here in attendance this evening. Chairwoman Carrie Gonzalez of the Dahlgren District is here, as well as James Monroe District School Board member T.C. Collins is here as well. So I thank you both very much for coming out this evening to support your division. Real quickly, before I go down the line, can you let our citizens know what a media specialist is, what that really is? Because they may not, well, except for maybe Mrs. Huber, might not know what a media specialist really is.
Sure,
please.
Absolutely. A media specialist is a licensed employee who works in the media center. Now, when we went to school, we referred to the media center as the library. But we don't refer to it anymore as that. It's a media center. We have media specialists. And we also have a paraprofessional in that budget who would also be working to support activity in the media center. We use, and it's beautiful, the new media center, the makerspace, close by, students. We want learning to be active. And we want to use that space so that students aren't sitting in desks necessarily in rows, but they're up and they're active because we know students learn best that way. So they're there to help support that.
Thank you. And I myself toured the addition to the middle school last week, and I want to thank Mrs. Collins for being available to give me that tour. It is beautiful. We should all be very proud of our new King George Middle School. So with that, my colleagues know I'm a stickler for procedure, and normally I do not entertain discussion unless there is a motion any second. However, because we do have you here, I will entertain some discussion. So first, I will go down the line for members and citizens and allow everyone the opportunity for questions, and then you can sit down. I'd like if you could stick around for a little while in case during the course of our discussion we have that leads to additional questions that you might be able to answer for us tonight, with hopefully a goal of at least getting a high number that perhaps will allow Mr. Cusenberry to begin advertising for us. And then if we have to, we'll reduce down the line for any department. But that's gonna be what we're gonna try to work towards this evening. It might be that we just can't get there tonight, but I do want to try. So that's how we're going to work this evening.
Happy to stay around.
All right. So let me start with, do you want to start, Mr. Granger, or do you want, you know what? Just because you said that, Mr. Bush, you go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Awesome. Thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Benson.
You're welcome.
And thank you to Ms. Gonzalez and Mr. Collins for joining us here tonight. So I have some line item questions. I know ultimately we're not telling you how to build your budget. We're looking at a number. But for me to be able to come up with a reasonable number, I have some specific questions. So first off, the middle school positions. I had great conversations with Ms. Collins because I had questions about this. I also spoke with my colleague on the school board for my district. The county did save a lot of money. I know we spent $22 million on the middle school expansion. However, we saved money because we didn't have to go acquisition new property and build another middle school. So I believe that those positions are appropriate. I'm not going to question those positions. But positions that I do want to question are the reinstated positions. Previously, Mr. Deshaun Turner's position, and then what was it, the communications? So can you tell me what changed that brought that up? Because I recall last year, I believe it was last year, it was that position really didn't merit or wasn't really required. I don't know if that was last year or the previous year, when it wasn't filled after the incumbent had left.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking and giving me a chance to kind of describe, because those positions were anything but not merited. You know, those were difficult cuts we had to make because the funding simply wasn't there. But I'm happy to, you know, as the director position, those responsibilities were burst back upon the existing or the remaining staff at central office. But the director position works closely with risk management items, operational items, facility issues, transportation issues. So when the previous person in that position was here, then we had another layer of administrative support. And it wasn't just support as a supervisor, it was really someone to help problem solve and to help us continuously improve in those areas and be more efficient. We also had issues of risk management. How could we improve the security of our buildings, make sure that our buildings you know, are tightly coupled in terms of security and safety measures. So that position in particular is sorely missed. We have limped through, for a lack of a better term. I have a very talented staff, but they have picked up. I have my supervisor of human resources is now working with transportation as an example. She also works with some of those other issues that I've mentioned to help support and pitch in. So we managed the last 2 years, and we understood that the funding simply wasn't there. We are hopeful, and we don't want those positions to then be forgotten, of course, because they're needed. Likewise with the communication, I think that's almost self-evident that with, you know, everything that we've had going on this year, you know, having someone dedicated to communication, to the website, to in-time announcements, that type of thing is sorely needed.
So the reason I brought that up, that represents $300,000 in salaries, those two positions.
And benefits.
So would you classify those positions as critical?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Second line of questioning, the CARES Act funding. So thank you again for sending the proposed expenses for CARES 2 funding. I understand it's moving. It's a working document, but it shows what future planning is for CARES funding application. Is there anything in your budget builder that CARES funding could supplant? In other words, if this money was not funded, or if the Board of Supervisors were to not fully fund your request, would you, and you lost money in one area, would you be able to supplant CARES funding to then fund that budget line item from your budget builder?
I think procedurally, you could certainly switch one expenditure with the other. And you made a very good point that um, I would caution that certainly we wouldn't use one-time funding for a recurring cost. In other words, personnel costs. We wouldn't want to do that because we build in then kind of a cliff where we get down where that funding is no longer available because it was only afforded one time. And now we need a source to continue to support that personnel cost that's recurring. But with that said, stuff items, possibly. My only hesitation would be I'd want to go back and review the terms of the grant to make sure there's not language in there that would prohibit that kind of adjustment. I don't know of any, but I would.
Specifically, I'm looking at Chromebooks. So Chromebooks are being requested. If you look at the technology department, there's hardware, new hardware, those types of things. But then you have that in technology support in this CARES proposal expenses. So is that an area? Because again, just in the new hardware and the hardware replacement, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about replacing Chromebooks because of the use, because of this year, the virtual environment, and then new hardware being the acquisition of new Chromebooks. Is that what that number represents? It's $188,540, $165,023. Is that what that represents?
Yes, but do understand that also represents our typical refresh. We refresh machines from school to school in a cycle. And to do that, we use a state grant that's afforded to us that has to be spent in a way that is aimed directly at technology. So the technical answer to your question is yes, those types of expenditures I believe would qualify for CARES. I just would want to make sure that the grant that is being targeted to buy precisely what you've referenced. Now there could be other technology items that may not apply, but I know that those Chromebooks in the operating budget are part of a cyclical refresh that we've maintained. And we've used a state grant to do that we are afforded each year.
Okay, and I brought that up because that represents $350,000 in the technology department. Also, if we could go to instruction. So look,
I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Bush. I just want to clarify to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about because I did not distribute the CARES. You know, you requested that of me.
All my colleagues received it, sir.
Right. I'm worried about the citizen committee may not know what we're talking about. But
okay.
That's all.
I apologize.
I saw some looks and I thought, oh, I'm
okay.
Sure that I clarify that.
Instruction. So instructions budgeting for textbooks, but then if you go to the individual school, they're budgeting for textbooks as well. So I was wondering is that a duplication of effort or why are there two separate line items for textbooks?
It's a good question. And the actual name that's put on that line item, again, is a state-borne name, but they are applied differently. The Central's textbook budget that you see is the process, or again, a cycle that we go through to refresh textbooks about every 7 years. And we try to adhere to the state schedule for refreshing those materials because, again, the state then works to coordinate any changes in the standards of learning or the curriculum at a time when then we can refresh the materials the kids use to learn that. The school-based textbook money is used for things like novels or ancillary materials that support the curriculum but are not the textbook, the typical textbook that every student at every school is issued, let's say. So you have the biology textbook, but then you may have a school that wants to use this program or these ancillary materials for teachers to support that curriculum. And so they have a budget they can use for those school-specific materials that they want to use. So that's how in substance they're different.
And then the positions, so teachers, staff, their salaries indicated in this budget builder, that reflects a 5%, which is the state's recommendation for a raise, but it also includes their prescribed step increases. Is that correct?
No, there's not a step increase on top of that. What we did was we took their current salary, we added 5% to that, and then we redrew the salary scale so that the amount that you land on with 5% is your next step. So we didn't change the scale 5% for everybody and then move people
Okay.
within another 2%. We did not do that. We redrew the salary scale.
Thank you for that clarity. All right, and then the last point, if I can make, Madam Chair, it's not a question, but just one point is, thank you for showing the slide with the state revenues, but I would like to point out the Commonwealth of Virginia did experience higher revenues than what was expected. The county still had our challenges. So while the state was afforded the opportunity to put in more money for the ADM into their budget, I really don't see the county having that type of luxury. They have lottery money and they have different colors of money where they move it around. So along with the additional monies comes additional regulations. So the state's putting all this stuff in and it's funding these things up front, but I doubt that funding is going to be recurring. I believe it's another situation where in a year or two, maybe 3, we will be experiencing unfunded mandates to where we're going to have to pick up even more of that. So I just wanted to throw that out. Dr. Benson, thank you very much for the presentation. I love the way you present the budget builder. It makes it very easy to go through. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender.
I want to thank you. This is the first time I've gotten one of these nice binders, and this is my 4th year, so I do appreciate it. And I have a few questions. I've been knocking on a lot of doors recently, and there's a lot of citizens who have one of the first questions they ask me when they open the door is, and I say, well, is there anything that concerns you? And they say, I want my kids back in school. So I appreciate that you have made that statement here. And I just want to make sure that you're saying that right now, 5 days a week, because a lot of the citizens that I'm giving my taxpayer money and the schools aren't open. And so they see these budget amounts and they want to know what they're getting for it. So I would really appreciate, like you said, to have this published on our county website, this booklet, and the school website, so the citizens could actually see it and make comments, because it's very important to them that their kids are back in school, and for many different reasons, but they want to see their taxpayer dollars spent.
Absolutely. We share the very same feeling.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What ADM numbers did you use? Did you use the ones that were projected at the beginning of the year or March to build this budget?
The same that we used for this current fiscal year, the 4380, I believe, is the number. So the very same. We did not project any increase, certainly. We used the very same ADM.
And did you factor in whether we will have a loss in student population, or I remember you said the state is absolving a little bit, but how does that shake out? Because I have talked to some parents that have transferred their children out of the school district and probably will not come back, and then some will probably homeschooling.
Yeah, I can tell you this morning I spoke with Ms. Webb, our student information system person, and we are running right now. We've had several students come back since we began the in-person learning. We're about 54 students under what we believed we would be hosting this year. So when I gauge that against what my colleagues are telling me across the state, it's a positive thing. It's certainly a loss of students. We hope that students come back. But you are correct. They haven't absolved necessarily, but they have included funding. They're calling it hold harmless, I believe, funding. So any discrepancy between the ADM between this year and next year, then school divisions and actually localities, boards of supervisors and city councils wouldn't be left holding to fill that gap, is essentially the legislation, not the legislation, but the line item they included in the budget. So yes, I don't want to say we didn't factor it in. We certainly considered it, but we also considered it in terms of what the state's doing to support for next year. FY23, it'll certainly be, because I would not anticipate that hold harmless funding being there from the state. We'll have to look at that very closely in FY23. That's a good point.
All right, thank you. And then concerning the middle school positions, I will be right up front, and I know Mr. Granger is one of those. Our children will be some of the middle schoolers there next year, including my daughter, who will be a 6th grader. And as Dr. Benson knows, I've been around for a while, and so I remember when the 6th graders used to go to the middle school. And so I'm glad you factored out some of these are SOQ related, but I still have heartbreak on a couple of, including the assistant principal. And I know that's your choice, but I remember when the school was run very well with 6th, 7th, and 8th with just one assistant principal. So, and why I mention that is we've got a lot of needs, as those that have been watching our meetings know. We have a lot of needs, and when you look at, if you take it as a dollar, the dollar can only stretch so far. So there's got to be some, we would have to raise taxes to fund all these positions. And so I would ask you to look, is there something that you might be able to give? That's how I put it. Because the county's got a lot of needs and we're trying to address them all. And then what was my other one? And then the only other question I had was on, you had mentioned the masks in the protocol. Is there any kind of metrics or that'll stop? Like it can't go on forever? Or have you even thought about that yet?
The math,
Wearing masks in the
masks.
partitions and all that. And I go that because that's also one of the questions people ask.
as
That being mandatory to wear to go back to school.
as long as that's the what's being promoted, this is my opinion. I'm certainly not able to speak for the school board, but I would, I guess it depends a lot on what's in place at the time we get to the fall. There's some unknowns. I mentioned the vaccine this morning. That's a good thing. But if I were to answer that question today, certainly we would keep the plexiglass, we would keep the masks, we would keep all the mitigating factors we've put in place to keep students safe.
Is that permanent or temporary? Or does the metrics have to be looked at? That's what, I know you can't answer it, but think about that question.
For the foreseeable future, and certainly I would think until the state of emergency is lifted, unless we're provided guidance otherwise from the governor's office. And again, I'm on a little bit of a guessing game. I don't have a crystal ball in terms of how any executive order would be amended in the future. But I think that we're focused on providing school 5 days a week, all day. We'll keep the mitigating factors in place. We think that that's going to help assure those who may be on the fence to coming into school, perhaps. And I think that it would be prudent to keep what we have in place right now for the foreseeable future.
And then with that, you said the vaccine.
I am not here to speak for the board.
I got that. And then vaccines, I know you mentioned that. I saw that study today. Is that going to be required, or that's something you haven't even looked at yet?
Not even talked about that.
Okay.
I don't think the state has even talked about that.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that just came out today, that study. Well, I thank you, and I appreciate you answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ms. Bender. Mr. Stonehill?
Thanks for all this information. Great book. I'm sure I'll have more questions after going through this, but a couple were answered by Mr. Bush's questions. One question, Chromebooks, are those for the kids to keep? Those are not going to be returned, or those, what are we doing with those?
No, they return them.
They are going to return them after we get back to whatever normal is going to be?
Yes.
Okay.
We would recollect equipment that's been purchased using taxpayer money. We would not
Okay.
forget about them, so to speak. That includes the hotspots that we purchased and used. We would recollect those as well.
Okay. And I keep hearing folks coming to talk to me. Everybody's complaining about where's all the money that's not used from last year. This is the public coming to me and speaking to me. When I look at the FY21 and 22 budget, people are always asking, well, if they're not, where's all the surplus of money that was not used? Where's that going? And can you address that?
I'm happy you brought that up. We call that fund balance at the end of a fiscal year. Typically, we have relatively little of that we do return to the county. I believe the county then repurposes in terms of capital needs for the county as a whole. It was asked, I think, at a school board meeting recently if we anticipated a fund balance. We certainly do. We've had avoided utility costs. We've had avoided transportation costs. I've talked with Ms. Williams, our finance manager on the school side, trying to gauge or estimate if there's going to be a fund balance, which we know there will be. What would that be? What do we estimate that would be? And it's difficult because, of course, we're a little more than halfway through the fiscal year. Part of our funding is sales tax that is accrued back, even as late as August, back into the school budget. So it's kind of a moving target to try to estimate, to put it short. But I think conservatively, I think I gave this answer the other night. I think conservatively, we may have between 600,000 and 800,000 in fund balance for this fiscal year. Certainly that's funding that could be available to help in your deliberations. The only thing I would reiterate and caution, and again, I'm not here to kind of shoot a hole in my own budget. You know, certainly I've thought of that too. Wouldn't that be great if we could then use some of the savings from this year to make next year a little less burdensome? Keep in mind that is similar to the CARES in that it's a one-time, it's a one-time fund balance. And so if we apply it to personnel costs, which if you can make my budget whole, I'm all, yeah, I want to do it. But in the back of my head, I'm like, red light goes off. Be careful that we don't create a revenue cliff, that in FY23, when I come to you, the costs are just as they were in FY22, but because we were able to cover a substantial part of those costs using either CARE or a combination of CARES and fund balance, those aren't necessarily there for to support FY23. You get what I'm saying? Is we just don't want to build in something that then comes back to haunt us. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about schools, but the county as well. That's all. But certainly we do anticipate, a larger than normal fund balance. If you're comfortable applying that, then great. I think that would be a good way to. It's certainly going to be used in some manner. If it could be applied to try to help lessen the burden of school budget, great. I think we just need to keep that, my point in mind for FY23.
I just keep hearing that a lot from folks, and they're
correct.
They don't see the information that we have, but they're coming up with. Obviously, there's the transportation costs and all the stuff that we didn't have this year. So I get that all the time. Well, where's all that money going? So.
And they could. The only thing I'd say is I think they could reference it on the cash flow report that I think you all receive each meeting or monthly at least, I guess. I know that at least you're receiving a cash flow report that detailed county funds as well as school funds, including our cafeteria. So it would, citizens could access that through this body in terms of an ongoing or formative view of how the budget's performing, not just at the county level, but the school level as well.
So Ms. Hahn, I know that Ms. Binder made this request last month. Can we make that available to the public on the county website on a regular basis?
Yes, in the past, previous department did not, would share it with the schools, share with the county administrator, the counties, as well as the general manager for service authority.
Right.
It wasn't an intermix.
And that's why I'm asking if we can make that happen, and that way we can start to have much more transparency on a regular basis. I think that would be helpful too.
So I can send those to Mr. Dines to get him to place it on the website.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
And last question.
Sorry, Mr. Stonehill. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Okay. The hardware that's coming back, Chromebooks and all that kind of stuff, are there plans for that?
Well, we'll certainly reuse it, repurpose it. Beyond that, I don't know if, to get to your question, as the previous question, if something's unusable, then it'll go to a recycler. It could go, we report it as surplus then through the county as far as inventory. I think on occasion we've done like surplus auctions or that kind of online auctions, that type of thing. But usable machines we're going to continue to use. I'll give you an example. Currently, we're getting into the SOL testing season, and so we're in a bit of a scramble to recollect machines that may not be in use at home. Students may be using their personal device in lieu of the Chromebook, and we're recollecting those so that we have enough machines in the school to host the SOL testing that needs to be conducted in the school. But we can also maintain the fleet of Chromebooks that are being used by students who are learning remotely, those who continue to learn remotely. So, with dual modalities, we've obviously realized that, we need to equip both, and it's put a strain on the supply of certain equipment, such as Chromebooks. But as they're returned, if they're usable, we continue to use them. We don't just replace for the sake of replacing.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you. I'm sure I'll have more questions when I get through the rest of this light reading that you supplied to us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. Mr. Granger.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Benson, thank you for coming out. I always appreciate you and your presentations. So I know Ms. Binder asked a little bit about the ADM. What I heard, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to tell you what I heard at least. So it sounds like there's a little bit of leniency from the state in regards to tracking ADM, and if it's not exactly right, I don't know what that means exactly, but they're not going to be as strict about it. Is kind of what I took away.
Well, it's not necessarily leniency as far as reporting. We'll still report it
Okay.
accurately. What is there is I'd refer to as kind of an insurance.
Okay.
There's actual money that's been placed in the state budget as insurance against ADM loss, which is expected really throughout the Commonwealth. Initially, we all expect there be an ADM loss relative to this current fiscal year.
Check it.
And so what the General Assembly did is build into their budget that insurance fund, so to speak, or that fund that will fill the gap between, let's say, if we built this budget on 4380 and next year we only realize 4350, well, the money associated with those 30 slots we could access then, and we would not be held in harm, so to speak.
Okay. So currently you are tracking ADM every day. Is that?
We take attendance every day, which ultimately then allows us to report ADM.
I guess my question would be, how accurate do you think that is in regards to kids? Because I'm assuming it's online, and I think they have to, if my understanding is right, they have to like log in and kind of say that they're in attendance. Do you have an issue with like reduced response from certain students? You know, I can imagine sometimes it's hard to, you know, there might be a group that do it regularly and recurring, but there might be some who just, you know, maybe don't do it. And do you have that kind of situation going on? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
I don't know how pervasive. I'm sure there are instances where students haven't logged on when they should have logged on.
Okay.
I don't know, Mr. Granger, how pervasive that is. I can only say that this morning I met with Carla, and again, from an attendance standpoint, or from a sorry, not attendance, enrollment standpoint, you know, we're probably, I think it was 54 students that I counted. We were shy in terms of what would then presumably be reportable in terms of ADM.
Okay. I appreciate that. I know that got a little bit into the weeds and wasn't particularly pertinent to this budget request, but I appreciate that. How many sixth grade teachers from the 3 elementary schools are you anticipating moving from the elementary schools to the middle schools? And are there any that you're looking to retain at the elementary schools? And are you looking to decrease class sizes or something like that? I'm just trying to figure out what the plan is in regards to that.
There's no strategy to reduce class sizes with this.
Okay.
I know I've met with Ms. Collins a couple of times to look at her master schedule and what's proposed. Your previous question is certainly applicable, because we need to see, you know, for that last position or two, we need to see who's actually in attendance so we don't overstaff. We don't utilize funds that are not needed. But I know that we are looking at between 12 and 14 of the sixth grade teachers division-wide and other staff moving to the middle school with that cohort of students.
How many teachers and staff at that grade level are there in total? You said 12 to 14. So what 12 to 14 out of? I'd
say 15 to 17.
Okay.
Including the, you know, there could be special education, that kind of thing. But
tracking.
I know 15. We have 5. I believe we have 5 at each of the elementary schools. So you know that those that's 15 at the elementary school level.
Okay. Understood. I know I'm going to have a lot more questions later, because I've been, and while you were giving your brief, I wasn't not paying attention, but some of the stuff is obviously, I don't know.
Did you log in so we get you attendance-wise?
It's regular repeating. So I was looking through some of the numbers, and so I'm just curious, Mr. Dines, could you bring the brief up again? Slide 14 from Dr. Benson's brief. I'm sorry. So I see here, this is showing the appropriation. This is your plan. So what does Fund 250 total cost? What does that mean?
That is our operating budget.
Operating.
That includes all of those appropriation units within that the budget book that you see,
Yes.
you'll see those very same amounts in some at the end of each of those appropriation unit sections of that book.
Are there any dollars that aren't accounted in that Fund 250 total cost in your budget? Or is that everything?
That is, well, there's federal funding in terms of grants. You know,
So that's not included in that?
that's correct.
Gotcha.
But the federal grants are for specified purposes. For instance, Title 6, under Title 6 through 619, Section 619 and 611 will receive funding that's specifically to support early childhood education or preschool.
Okay.
Receive funding that's specifically targeted for certain special education services.
Okay. I think I'm good. Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Benson.
All right. I'll open it to our Citizen Advisory Committee members. Mr. Chapman, do you have any questions, sir? Go right ahead, sir.
So again, thank you, Dr. Benson, for being here. This is really about the healthcare, the 3.75%. Can you just, what is the split between the employer and employee? We know that?
Of the increase or overall?
Of the increase.
Of the increase, it's a 50-50 split. We took the additional dollars associated with that increase, and we've assigned them to, half to the employee, half to the employer. So it varies by the plan that you choose. So we'll have several different health insurance plans that an employee can choose. And it'll, the dollars will actually vary depending on which plan they choose, or if they participate. We have some that don't participate. Their spouse may be accessing insurance through their work. But that's how we, for this budget, that's how we allotted the extra dollars. It's a 50-50 split.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all that I have.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Huber.
Thank you. Question for you. Is tonight the time where I can express some personal perspective on the school, or is there another time to do that as a mentor? What is your suggestion?
So right now we're in questions, and I did say I will entertain some discussion so that we can get to a number. So our goal here is to try to get a high number that we can advertise for the budget. So administration can advertise. And then we do intend to have a joint work session with the school board where it might be that we keep that number that we advertised, or it might be that we reduce it. And it might be that we reduce it for many other departments too, because we advertise the high and then we can always reduce it, but we can't ever increase the number that we originally advertised.
Okay. And sorry, go ahead.
So I would say to you right now, we're asking Dr. Benson questions. So let's stick with that. And then I am going to go around again and see if anyone wants to offer some discussion to get to our goal for tonight.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I do want to say to Dr. Benson, I just first want to thank you for everything you've done as our school leader. I can't imagine all the things that you've had to deal with during this time. I just want to express my gratitude for keeping our school board informed of the ever-changing guidelines and providing them with your advice. I also want to acknowledge that what you've experienced this year was like no other, and I know you did your best despite being entirely unprepared for what was to come. And sitting on the board, it's been firsthand getting to see the agonizing decisions you all have to make. And I can see that you guys work really hard and you truly are concerned with our King George citizens. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for allowing me this opportunity to be on this committee. I do have a few questions. I was just curious how King George fits with the, if you know this, you might not, with the state average of the per pupil expenditure. Do you know if what we spend per pupil is about average of what the state spends? Are we above it or below it?
I can find that. I'd have to reference it. I think there's an annual report that the state superintendent of public instruction puts out, and I think it's table 14 of that report. I think the most recent available on the DOE website, though, is for fiscal year 18 maybe, or 19. So I could certainly provide that answer, but in the context of that fiscal year. I don't know Of course, I won't know until the state develops that table for FY20, I guess, to give
Okay.
you a more recent.
I did try to understand the tables, but it was quite overwhelming. I came up with that we're below the average, but I just wanted to verify with you if I was doing it right.
Can I add to that though? But remember that, you know, the dollars, if you look at the dollars and you compare divisions to divisions in terms of dollars, remember I talked about the LCI, or I talked about how the state tries to bring about that 55-45% partnership. So I think you have to kind of take that into consideration, because the state's formula recognizes that there's different, you know, different economies, local economies have different levels of robustness, you know, or different capacity to fund. And so that's why it's important you not just look at the dollars, but you look at the relative percentage of the budget as a whole, or the you know, look at it from that, through that lens as well, to really infer if it's equal or equitable in terms of the metric that you're referencing. So that would be my only caution.
Okay, I appreciate that. So for the fund, were you calling it the fund balance when we were discussing the money that comes back?
Remaining funds in any fiscal year would be a fund balance.
Okay, so this is just so I understand. I learned that about 500,000 came back for the 1920 school year, and you were kind of giving the advice that we don't always use that for the following school year, so it doesn't lead to a possible deficit down the road. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, any fund balance in the school's budget is presumed to be local funding, and it returns to the local government for the Board of Supervisors to administer then. And I do believe, I don't want to speak for the Board of Supervisors, but I think that fund then helps offset costs with capital projects. Certainly some of those, you know, will be the schools, you know, and so it, you know, in a roundabout way, I think the fund balance does help address needs of the schools, but it's under the discretion of the Board of Supervisors in the next fiscal year.
Okay.
So, Mrs. Huber, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're going to have Ms. Hahn, our Director of Finance, answer that question for you. Go ahead, Ms. Hahn.
Okay, at the end of the year, when all the books are being tabulated, any of the fund balance that is left in the school's budget does come back to the county. However, if there's any like major purchases that the school has already encumbered after the books have been closed for that fiscal year, those funds are returned back to the school to continue with those, and any remaining funds are put in the fund balance of the county.
Okay, I think I'm understanding now. I appreciate that.
Can I add to that? Those are typically called encumbrances, or they would be, let's say you had a late in the year purchase for coral risers, yet the bill is going to come in after the fiscal year flips. And so what the county then allows is for that money to be encumbered. And then when the bill comes in, it's then charged back to the previous fiscal year. So it helps facilitate that time period between two fiscal years.
Okay, thank you.
And that is also general fund balance. It's not capital funds.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Say?
Okay, just a couple questions. One of them I'm pretty sure is answered, but I'm still trying to get my head a little bit around the whole ADM and state funding. If when we go into 22, if the county has less students than anticipated, am I understanding correctly that won't reduce the state funding coming into the county?
Correct.
Okay. And the only other question, the equipment services and consumables of $460K, is that a typical increase per year, or is that an out of family increase that we're looking at for FY22?
No, it's typical. I think, I'm not sure the percentage. I think it was a 3%, 5%. I don't think it was more than 5% from the previous year in terms of supplies, those types of expenditures.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, we hope that's one area. It's a good question because we don't know from an inflation standpoint what's going to occur in the coming months. But that's our best guess right now is as far as the expenditure amount.
Thank you.
Ms. Thompson.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Back to the Chromebook question. After we're back full-time, no more virtual, is it still the intention to issue Chromebooks to students just to support their learning in general, to make sure every student has a Chromebook or some device to use in the future?
We've not discussed that. I mean, that's certainly something that could be possible, I guess. We've not discussed that specifically in terms of keeping the Chromebook issued for that student to take back and forth kind of thing.
Okay, because then my follow-up question to that was going to be, would then Chromebooks or some sort of technology device eventually replace textbooks, the good old-fashioned textbooks you talked about, because that's a huge expense also.
Yeah.
So
And
technology to eventually one day replace textbooks, just wondering if that was something in the
wouldn't
works.
that be nice? Yeah. But actually, I'll share just my personal experience. Prior to this life, I was a assistant superintendent in Cobb County, Georgia, for curriculum and instruction. And that's 107,000 students. And so early on, again, this is 10 years ago, we were looking at the textbooks, the online textbooks, the usage of online textbooks. From a cost, the assumption being that the cost would be dramatically less because you didn't. But what we learned is that you're really paying for the research and development of those textbooks. It didn't really reduce costs. And at that time, the feedback we've gotten, and I've read from my colleagues, instances where the feedback they've gotten, people want, particularly for those kind of hands-on math or those types, they want the book there. It's too difficult for some kids to flip through. It may work well for some, but I guess that's my old-fashioned opinion. I don't know that we would really go to substituting completely electronic resources for textbooks, so to speak.
Thank you. So I had one question. Well, I'm not sure if it's a question, probably not that you could answer tonight, but maybe a suggestion to put in the ear of the school board, since a couple of you all are here tonight. So it ties into Ms. Binder's question about masks. And I realize most of that is driven by CDC guidelines and or state requirements. And you have to do what you have to do, obviously, if there are policies driven by the State Department of Education as influenced by the governor. So the comment was made about the 12 to 15-year-olds being vaccinated. So might the policy for students be consistent, just like the CDC policy now for adults that are more than 2 weeks past full vaccination, that if they have had an exposure, they do not have to quarantine, and therefore your students, if they were fully vaccinated, they could be in school even if they had an exposure?
Well, certainly. We've followed the VDH guidelines in terms of quarantine with our health plan.
Right, because that's a CDC guide. The CDC guidelines were updated March 23rd, last week.
So I guess you're asking a question about.
I'm just saying, can we make sure, can we have the school board as part of their plan? Because you're here and you want to be here, and I've said this to a couple people now, and the goal, I'm guessing from what you're saying, is 5 days a week in-person instruction, and I think that's a great goal. So then we come up with a plan and work the plan to get there. As you're planning, can you all make sure that you're addressing the mitigation strategies or whatever it is you have to do, that realizing that not everyone may want their child to receive a vaccination, but if they do and they are past full vaccination, there shouldn't be a reason to keep them out of school, is where I'm coming from.
I agree with you logically. All I would say is that up to this point, I would continue to just simply adopt what the VDH puts out in terms of if this, then this.
Sure. Yeah,
It makes sense to me.
Suggesting that, everyone be mindful of that so we can get to a point where we can get as many kids back in person every day next year.
Yeah. I don't think that would be a school board, that would be a VDH decision, I would hope.
Okay. All right. So I didn't have any other questions, but as I stated, I will entertain some discussion with the goal of trying to get to a top number for planning purposes, and then eventually would have a future work session with the school board to finalize everything. So Mr. Bush, would you like to start again?
Really? And I behaved so well in my last line of questioning. All right, hold on.
Thank you, Dr. Benson. You can have a seat.
So last year, local funding was $17.5 million. We looked at reducing their request by $300,000, and that was made up in CARES Act support that we provided to the schools. I think that we did a good job last year considering the unknowns out there, and I'm not going to fault the schools for the situation that they were under. However, I have heard from my constituents, there hasn't been a return on investment. Just honestly, virtual education has not worked for many of our students. If you look at the numbers, and I asked my colleague on the school board for these about a month ago, and they were shared through the schools, there are more children that are failing 2 or more classes than there were before. It's almost double. So virtual has worked for some of those students that can excel in that environment. For many, it didn't. So if we look to the scenario of summer school coming up this year, I got a feeling there's going to be a lot more students in summer school this year. That was spoken to at the school board's meeting on Monday night that I was following along. So my constituents are coming to me with a return on investment type issue. They're looking at the schools here, and then they're looking at all the other county needs too. Staffing, we're at staffing levels from when the county's population was 17 to 18,000 citizens. Now we're looming 27,000, but our staffing numbers really haven't grown. We've always made those cuts. Last year when we were looking at the budget, the county made significant cuts on our part to be able to not have a tax rate increase for citizens. And Dr. Benson brought this point up tonight. He was talking about the fiscal year 23 scenario of a fund balance and how that would play out. That's what the county is facing at this very moment, because we utilized revenue stabilization funds last year to be able to balance our budget without a tax rate increase. Now, our county has a lot of citizens who have teleworked. They have very good incomes. They've been getting a paycheck. I have other citizens that haven't worked in over a year. So there's that balance right there that we need to strike, because whatever we're going to obligate in the end of the day is going to translate into a tax increase. Travis already presented that we're looking at a minimum of a 3-cent tax increase just for the courthouse alone. That's already happening. So people are looking, especially if you're a customer of the service authority. So your rates are going up. Now your tax rate's going to be going up, and hey, I don't have a job. So that's a real scenario that we're facing. I understand the needs. I understand the county's needs, which have to be addressed, and we need to strike a balance between both. So I would like to look at a scenario of, based on the points that I made in my questions to Dr. Benson on those 2 particular line items, and the ability of CARES Act funding being able to supplant some of the line items in their operational budget that they're presenting, I would be apt to fund to last year's local funding level. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender.
Thank you. I have to think for a minute on this, but I made a lot of points about our students and the parents. And I mean, I've been knocking on doors, and I had one person that really touched me because she was almost in tears because her child is suffering with virtual learning, and she had to quit her job and doesn't able to work because she has to be home to try to help her child succeed with virtual learning. And it meant a lot to her to please come back to school. So hearing that, and I want you to stick to that plan, or hope you stick to that plan to let the kids come back, because some virtual, I've talked to people, it works great. They're thriving. It's really important to them, and they're doing well in the virtual environment, but there's a lot of kids struggling, and I've coached for many years, and school is very important to kids, and it could be the lifeline that sets them up for a great future. And I feel that we're failing them right now with this virtual learning. We didn't invent COVID. We didn't bring it here, but it happened. And I just think we could do a better job. And with that being said, I did ask for your budgets for the last 4 years. And I have a lot of questions on the budgets. I've seen a big increase in spending from May to June on years, sometimes over $2 million in some categories that is spent. They're not spent all the year, and then it jumps up in that time period. There's probably different answers for it, like ADM, getting the proper numbers and then being able to spend for it. But when these are published online, there's going to be a lot of citizens that see that and start to ask those questions. So be prepared to answer those questions. And it comes down to thinking, I know Mr. Bush said this our last budget work session, but we do have a lot of needs, especially in public safety. And when we call 911, we call our fire and EMS, not our third grade teacher. But third grade teachers are important because they give the backbone of setting up for a career and being good citizens. But every year we usually give to the schools and it's pretty easy, but we have to find a balance, especially on the county side. All of us here we've been really striving hard to put the county on the right footing for whatever happened in the past, and the service authority, everything. And so when you look at that, I bring up the dollar a lot because I love that analogy, and I learned it at a VACO convention, the dollar. And the schools get a lot of that dollar, and then we have to fund everything else in the county with the rest of the dollar. So we all need to work together to find that proper balance to help our citizens. And a lot of our citizens right now don't feel that the schools have brought their end up on the bargain. But I know you guys work hard, and you have a lot of teachers out there that have been working really hard to help those students, and they should also be able rewarded for that effort. But then I get complaints from some citizens that see teachers doing things on Facebook, and they reach out that they don't feel their teachers are helping them. So there's that balance. And I don't know what the solution is, but the local funding from last year, I'll get back to the end of what I was saying. I don't know if I support exactly the last year's funding, maybe a little bit more. I would like to hear the rest of my colleagues before I give an 100% on that, but I just think all these positions is a little too much. But I do understand why some of them are important, and they were pointed out to me why, like the gym teacher. Makes sense, coming from the middle school. That teacher stays there. You're not bringing somebody like that up. You have to hire a new teacher. Some of the other positions make sense, like a new band teacher. You offer a lot of programs to try to help the students be successful in arts, because not everybody's an athlete. But it's just, I know we can work together, but I think what you got up there for the 18, 8, 7, 9, 9, 17 to 38% is a little too much. So I want to listen to the rest of my colleagues before I come to a decision on a number. So I will pass off the baton.
Thank you, Ms. Bender. Mr. Stonehill.
I'm going to hold off until later meetings before we come up with a number so I can go through the rest of this right here. I just don't have enough information to come up with another number.
Mr. Granger.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So this current year, the local contribution was $17,545,574. The previous year to this year, the local contribution was $17,845,574, which is $300,000 more. So the year before this current year, we gave $300,000 more to the schools, and the reason we reduced it by $300,000 last year was COVID, obviously. And so we knew the schools were getting some COVID money or some stimulus money in, and so we said, well, hey, we're going to say, hey, use that kind of like we use our revenue stabilization fund in order to help supplant some of those issues. It was a hard year for all of us. Everyone. It was just hard. We all took it. So right off the bat, I know they're showing here that they're asking for 1.334 million more. I'll be honest, I look at it more as like about $1 million more, because to me, right off the bat, I would go back to what the previous year's local contribution was, which was 17.845. So just my stance on that one, at the very least, I'd go to that. I look at some of those SOQs. I know that last year there was talking about the school counselors, and then that got put on hiatus, I believe, again, because of COVID. So I know some of these are unfunded mandates. So I would be inclined to at least be willing to really consider those. And I think for the media specialist and the paraprofessional and the school counselor came out to a hair under $200,000. So I think Mr. Stonehill has a good point. It's tough to come up with a number tonight. There's a lot of data to review, but I think I would at least be willing to entertain. I wouldn't say I'd have to go that high, but I'd be willing to go up to about another 500,000 above our current year contribution. So, which would put it at 18,045.
Madam Chair, Richard, what was those positions you mentioned?
Sure. It's in the packet. If you go to page 12 of the presentation, for additional staffing needs, there's a list of them, and there's a many of them for the middle school expansion, which I understand. I'm not saying those aren't good requests, just trying to find a balance for all of our needs. But about the fourth or fifth one down, there's a media specialist and media center paraprofessional per SOQ ratios. And then the one right below that shows school counselor per SOQ ratios. And then on slide 13, Dr. Benson also provided the estimated cost with benefits for those positions, which I added those up and it came a hair under 200,000. So I looked at that, plus the fact that we had reduced local contribution last year due to the challenges we were facing. And I was willing to do that last year, but I said it and I meant it. I was like, this is a 1-year fix for us because I'm not a fan of reducing contribution to the schools. So at the very least, I think we got to at least put in that extra 300,000 that we reduced by.
Can I say something? Can I let you all know where I'm at now? So I'm pretty close to you. So where I'm at is I'm going to suggest a reduction from the proposed $18,879,917. I'm suggesting a reduction of $650,000. That brings me to $18,229,917. And without me picking on any, we just approved the amount of money, but kind of where I got that from was, okay, the two positions in the school board office come to around $300,000 and the Chromebooks come to around $350,000. So then I come up with $650,000 and we say, can we see what you can do, figure out how you want to allocate it, or figure out how much of a priority those things are, is kind of where I'm coming from. Even though I know we don't really tell them how to spend their money, that's just how I looked at it. So, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wasn't looking just along the local contribution as far as the overall revenues. What I'm looking at is the additional $2 million coming in from the state, which is bringing their overall budget to an increase of $3,334,343. So that's the end number that I'm looking at. So there, with the funding, that's the increase that they're going to be getting. I do want to see the positions at the middle school. I believe they're valid. I believe that's something that previous board, even though it wasn't said so, but that assumption was there. If you're going to build this new facility, you need to follow the middle school curriculum and instruction, and it requires those additional positions. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but for once, I agree with the 5% raise for the teachers going into this year. I did spend a lot of time looking at comparables, especially over the bridge and stuff. But that aside, I'm still looking at what our overall budget for the county is. And that's why focusing in on that local contribution is why I would be cutting or willing to cut so significantly to last year's rates, is because their overall funding is increasing by, just the state, $2 million. So I wouldn't be opposed to advertising at the levels Ms. Kupka is suggesting, if that's going to be our high water mark. And then we can look at going down there, because ultimately we're just looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective. And then we're punting to the school board because they have to decide how they're going to allocate those funds. But yes, Ms. Kupka, I would support your high water mark if that's what you want to move forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender?
What was the number again? I'm sorry.
18,229,917.
I would be fine with that.
Yep. So I'm going to give my other two colleagues a minute here, and let's speak to our citizens. Mr. Chapman, you have any comment? Would you like to add to the discussion, sir? Okay. Mrs. Huber?
All right, thank you. I have to agree with what everybody has said tonight with like your feelings. I'm not even going to consider numbers at this point. I'm going to just give you what I feel would be adequate to make the school run efficiently and properly. And I do really want to see that we take care of our staff so that we can take care of the students, because that's our overall goal, is to take care of our future King George citizens. And our spending inequities in education do have an impact, and a large body of research suggests that money does matter in education. And when school districts spend their money wisely, they have better outcomes like higher test scores, graduation rates, and just other improvement factors and indicators. And more money also helps ensure that students have schools with better facilities and more curriculum options, just like we've seen with the awesome middle school expansion. And this has clear implications for the public school system, as there's students that do not get their fair share of dollars, do not get an equal chance to compete with their more advantaged peers. And that as a citizen, I want to make sure that my future, King George citizens have the same advantage as everybody else does. And I'll make myself clear. I am a teacher in the county, but I'm not a parent. I don't have students in the school system that are benefiting from my tax dollars, that are going for them. But I do understand as a teacher and as an educator that we need to make sure that these young citizens have the equal opportunities. And that comes from funding the positions that take care of all of our society's needs. And we need you all to keep serving and defending and representing all of our society's various interests, so that we do have kids that go on to college career paths, but we also take care of our students that go on to the technical careers, which are our firefighters and our policemen and our armed services and military. So my point with all of this being said is that I fear if we don't at least take care of our staff and make sure our students are taken care of, because they are the direct impact with our students, that we will see the same issues that the firefighters are facing right now that Chief Moody brought to our attention. And these need to be addressed quickly. We have to turn around quickly from this, year of all years that educators have dealt with. And if these aren't addressed quickly, I fear that our students will will have high dropout rates in the next 5 years, because it's going to take that long to recover. So whatever is decided on, I really hope that the students and the people who directly impact our students are the ones that we keep in the forefront of the decision on what we decide to give to the schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Huber. Mr. Say.
All I really had to say, I think the logic that y'all have used tonight to get to a high water mark makes a lot of sense to me. It makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Say. Ms. Thompson, do you have anything to add? Okay. Mr. Granger?
So your number was higher than mine, so I'd be willing to advertise at that level, and then see where we end up at.
Mr. Stonehill?
My number as well was higher than yours, so I'm good to advertise with that.
Okay, so I believe we have consensus. However, I would like a motion and a formal board vote so we can authorize Mr. Cusenberry to advertise the school budget line item at that rate.
Could you give
that dollar amount? I'm sorry.
Could you give me the dollar amount?
Yeah. And Ms. Hahn, since you're the director of finance, will you just double check my math? I've done it like 4 times on my calculator just so we get this right, but I'm tracking $18,879,917 less $650,000, and I come out at $18,229, $229,917. Okay, so I need a motion, please.
You said 18,229, 917?
18,229,917. Yes, sir.
Okay. I move that the board authorize the county administrator to advertise the school's budget local contribution at $18,229,917.
Second.
Any further? We're going to pause for just a moment. You okay? All right, then. We have a motion that has been properly seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Mr. Kusenberry, you have your direction, sir.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank again Dr. Benson for your presentation, your very thorough presentation this evening, for coming out, and all the school board members who joined as well. Thank you very much. And we're going to take, it is now 10 minutes to 8, and we're coming up on 2 hours. So let's take a 10-minute recess, and we will resume the meeting at 8 o'clock sharp, please. Thank you. Can I have the attention, please, of caller 3 online? Is that Mr. Conboy from Community Development? Can you hear us?
Yeah, hello?
Caller 3?
Yeah.
Is that you, Kyle?
Can you hear me? Yes,
Yes, we can. Very good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, Mr. Dines, are you ready? Yes. Very good. All right, let's go ahead and resume the meeting. We left off, we're at number 4, Department of Community Development fee schedule. Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I also have here tonight the acting building official, Rick Heron, and online Kyle Conboy, our GIS manager. At your seats, I provided you with a copy of our presentation tonight and a lot of literature. We provided you with our current fee schedule, our proposed change fee schedules for residential, commercial, planning, and zoning. We also gave you some information regarding GIS fees and some stats of how we compare with other localities, as well as all of our surrounding localities' fee schedules, so you have for comparison. Next slide, please. So we did look at Stafford County, Spotsylvania County, City of Fredericksburg, Caroline, and Westmoreland County. Next slide. Some of the major changes or proposed new fees are an application deposit, an advertisement cancellation fee, subdivision appeal fee, third-party fiscal impact study fee, GIS fee, a plan review fee, a amendment review fee, and a solar farm fee. Next slide. Currently, our fees are not due until the building permit is ready for pickup. For larger planning reviews, the fees are calculated in the first review letter, and by the second submittal, for example, the fees are due by the second review letter, for example, rezoning, special exceptions, etc. We found that staff has been working for free if these projects never move to the next stage. Therefore, we are proposing an application deposit for larger projects such as new commercial construction or renovation, residential dwellings, or additions would be a deposit of $500. A planning fee includes major plan submittal deposit of $500. This would be major subdivision plats, stormwater plans, etc. Minor plan submittals would be a $200 deposit. This would include minor subdivisions, boundary line adjustments, etc. The deposit would be put towards the total cost of the project, with the remainder due at the pickup or at the second submittal, depending on the type of application. The proposed deposits would be non-refundable. Advertisement cancellation fee. Public hearings are required to be advertised through the local paper. Anytime an applicant removes their application, that fee is forfeited, and the applicant is required to pay the cost of the advertisement. When there are multiple cases or multiple public hearings on the same ad, it could be difficult to determine the cost due by that particular applicant. So we are proposing an advertisement cancellation fee of $400, or the minimum ad of the cost of the fee, of the minimum fee of the ad. Next slide. This past year, we had our first subdivision appeal. Because there was not a fee assigned to a subdivision appeal, this process was done for free. A subdivision appeal is proposed at $900, which would be the same as a zoning appeal, variance, etc. These fees also include the advertisement cost. A third-party fiscal impact study. Large rezonings applications often require the county to hire a third party to conduct a fiscal impact study. This study should not be done at the cost to the county. Should the county decide to hire a third party to conduct a fiscal impact study, that cost would be passed along to the applicant. Next slide. King George County has a fantastic GIS system that is a great planning tool utilized by staff, the public, and just about every department in the county. Currently, we do not charge for this service. We're proposing an address assignment fee of $25 per address. Issuing a residential or commercial address involves map, plan, and deed review, GPSing of the address, driveway, road, processing the address, driveway, road into the GIS system, adding the features to the road maps, and publishing the address and road to third-party citizens, including citizens, developers, Verizon, the post office, county offices, state Virginia agencies, county road maps, and web apps, including online GIS, which is used by over 4,000 unique users. We're also proposing a property division adjustment at $15 per lot. This would include all plans, plats, rezonings, boundary line adjustments. Wherever a subdivision of a property is created, property lines are adjusted. The GIS office reviews deeds and plats related to the property change, coordinates numbers of the parcels with the Commissioner of Revenue, uses coordinate geometry tools to bring the new or changed parcels into the GIS, and checks parcel lines to the zoning lines for concurrence, and publishes parcel changes to third parties, developers, Commissioner of Revenue, maps, clerk of the circuit court maps, community development maps, and web apps. These are also a table of how we compare to other localities surrounding us. Next slide. We're also proposing a plan review fee. In reviewing the surrounding localities, we noted that most other localities impose a plan review fee for the building department review. Currently, King George County does not have a plan review fee for residential permits. Residential would be $100 plus $50 for each additional review letter, which would include single-family dwellings, addition to structures, and other miscellaneous. Commercial is currently was previously proposed at 2 cents per square foot at $100 for minimum currently. The new fee would be 5 cents per square foot with $200 minimum. And then commercial sign plan review fee is new and would be $100. Amendment review fee for commercial. Amendment review fee for commercial properties typically require building plans to be re-reviewed for compliance with the building code in addition to the plans already approved. This fee is proposed at $200. Solar farms. A solar farm is proposed at $300 per megawatt. For example, a 50 megawatt solar farm would be a $15,000 permit. We have proposed fee increases in the commercial building permit fee schedule, the residential building permit fee schedule, and the planning and zoning fee schedule. Building permit fees have not been overhauled in several years. Planning and zoning was last overhauled in 2018 with some building permit fees updated. Residential permit fees. Proposed increases are shown in red. Most building permits are calculated by square foot with a base permit minimum. Single-family dwelling permit has increased from 25 cents to 35 cents with a minimum fee of $200, which was previously $100. The 35 cents per square foot includes the electrical, plumbing, and mechanical permit that is required with any new single-family dwelling. Grading permits under 1 acre of disturbance, which allows the use of in lieu of agreement, have increased from $75 to $300. Each grading permit, also known as a land disturbance permit, requires an inspection every 2 weeks or after every erosion-causing rainfall until final stabilization. Zoning fee has increased from $75 to $125. Grading and zoning fees have not been increased for at least 15 years, if not more. Here's where the plan review fee previously discussed has been implemented, $100 plus $50 for each additional letter. Remodel interior, such as a finished basement, has increased from 15 cents per square foot to 25 cents per square foot, with a minimum of $150 fee. We did not include the trades in this price because each permit is different and may not require a mechanical or plumbing permit based on the needs of the homeowner. Price per square foot for the trades did not increase, but the permit minimum has increased from $50 to $75. However, we did not want to charge a basement remodel at more than a new construction, so we added the note that a total cost shall not exceed 35 cents per square foot total. Next slide. Additions to structures such as additions, porches, sunrooms, etc., increase from 15 cents per square foot to 25 cents per square foot with a $150 minimum, which was previously $100. A plan review fee is implemented here. Manufactured homes have different fees because they require less inspections and plan review time, as they are pre-manufactured in a factory. While in the factory, these homes are inspected prior to leaving that factory, and the fees are broken down by the size and whether the mobile home will be placed in a mobile home park or on private land. Parks are set up with the ability to essentially pull in and assemble and leave. However, on private land, a grading permit is often required to clear land for the placement of the home. Single wides have been increased from $150 to $200, double wides at $225 to $300, and triple wides from $300 to $375. Miscellaneous building permit was $75, which has increased to $150. Stick-built garages, barns, sheds, previously 15 cents a square foot, are now 20 cents per square foot with a minimum of $150, which was previously $75. Decks uncovered and under 300 square feet with a minimum building permit of $150, and decks greater than 300 square feet are $175, previously $75 and $125. Exterior egress steps only are $75. This was previously $50. Pools above ground without electric, $75, which was previously $65. Above ground with electric is $200, previously at $125. In ground with electric, $200, previously $115. Plan review fee has been added for garages, barns, or decks not utilizing the typical deck design. All of these permits require a zoning fee, and if disturbance is over 2,500 square feet, a grading permit is also required. Electrical upgrades, mechanical, plumbing, demolition for residential has all been increased to $75 from $50. Tank and line permit has been increased to $100, previously $75. A generator, which includes a mechanical and an electrical permit, is $150, which was previously $100. Retaining walls, bulkhead, boathouse increased into a minimum fee of $150, which was previously $75, and $100 for a boathouse. Cost per square foot was not increased. Building Code of Appeal was previously $250, is now $300. Modification is now $100, previously $75. And after the fact fee is double the original cost, previously capped at $250, has now a $300 maximum fee. Temporary occupancy was $50, is now $75. Amendments and administrative fee has increased from $25 to $35. While some of our fees appear to have made a large jump and others a step increase, I thought it would be beneficial to see how common permits often pulled by homeowners stack up against other localities. Typical house sizes start at 1,500 square feet. The green is the difference from our current fees, not the proposed, and as you can see, our current fees are behind. Our proposed fees put us behind some localities but ahead of others. When increasing certain areas of our fee schedule, we took into consideration staff time, inspection trips, materials, etc. This varies with different project types. We utilized a 1,500 square foot home because it was a good variable to easily double for a 3,000 square foot home and triple for a 4,500 square foot home, and so forth. Decks and pools are some of our most popular permits. In 2020, King George had 170 new single-family dwellings. Assuming on average they were 3,000 square foot in size, the average permit fee was $915 for a single-family revenue total of $155,550. With the proposed fee, the average 3,000 square foot home would cost $1,599 for a new revenue total of $271,830, a surplus of $116,000. Of course, these numbers are approximate as home sizes do vary. In summary, you can see that all other localities' end price point is above King George County. Commercial permit fees. Commercial permits do not include electrical, mechanical, and plumbing permits. The building permit is set at 25 cents per square foot with a $300 minimum, previously 15 cents per square foot and $125 minimum. Remodel or shell only permits at 15 cents per square foot with a $200 minimum, previously 10 cents per square foot with a $75 minimum. Electrical permits are 75 cents per amp of service, a $200 minimum, or 10 cents per square foot, whichever is greater. With large commercial buildings, some require extremely large electrical demands, while others don't, and this is why we set the price per the amp of service. Plumbing and mechanical permits are 10 cents per square foot, $200 minimum, previously 5 cents per square foot with a $100 minimum. Site lighting permits were previously a $100 permit. However, we found that some commercial projects require numerous site lights. Walmart parking lot, for example, that requires multiple inspections. This increase is set at $75 for the first pole and $25 for each additional pole. A commercial pool is 15 cents per square foot with no change, except with the new minimum permit fee of $300. Solar farm is a new fee that has been added as previously described. Fire protection systems increase of a permit minimum from $100 to $200. Kitchen hoods, $300 per type 1 hood or $200 per type 2 hood, previously set at $150 per hood without a type difference. Fire dampers and specialized detection equipment were previously $10 per device, increased to $15 with a new $150 minimum. Limited area sprinkler system with 10 heads or less is $350, previously $100. Sprinkler system at 10 cents per square foot with a $350 minimum. This was increased by 5 cents and $50. Relocation of sprinklers increased to $200 from $100 for 5 heads or less, or 10 each. Keep in mind that the fire department staff also participates in these fire protection inspections. Amusement devices has a small increase, however, these fees are set by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Next slide. Signs, illuminated signs require electrical inspection, which is why their fee is more than a non-illuminated sign. Illuminated on a building is $100 per sign, previously $75, no matter how many signs were permitted at a time. Illuminated freestanding, $200, previously $100. However, per our ordinance, only one freestanding sign is permitted. No non-illuminated sign on a building is $75 per sign, previously $50 without limitation. A non-illuminated freestanding sign of $100 per sign, previously $75. Sign plan review fee has been added for $100. Miscellaneous commercial fees. Cell towers at $1 per foot, minimum of $200, was previously a $100 fee. Plan review fee for commercial at 5 cents per square foot, a minimum of $200. After hours inspections to be pre-approved by the building official at $100 per hour, a minimum of 2 hours, previously at $75 an hour. A notice of violation fee was previously $100, is now $150. Commercial reinspection fee and temporary occupancy permit is $100, previously $75. Commercial amendment fee, $200. This is a new fee added. Stop work order, $75, and this will also be a new fee. At your desk, there is a spreadsheet that is color-coded to show how our planning and zoning fees compare to other localities. Planning and zoning fees were last updated in 2018. Because these fees were updated a few years ago, staff made an effort to align these fees with neighboring localities. To be comparable, keep in mind that King George County is an opt-in locality for stormwater program, even though we are not an MS4 locality. Caroline and Westmoreland County do not administer their own stormwater program. So you can see the fee increase for a preliminary plan, a construction plan, site plan, rezoning, special exception, third comment review letter, variance, and the advertising cancellation fee. Wetlands Board permit has been increased by $400 to include the cost of advertisement. As you are probably aware, the cost of ads in the Freelance Star have increased significantly over the years, especially after the loss of our local paper. Home occupation permits have increased from $25 to $50. To my knowledge, both permits have not increased in over 15 years. Under desk, you've been provided a comparable based on the permit type. Here we look at a recent special exception for an event venue with 20 acres, and the fee total was $3,000. It is now increased to $4,500. Next is a large rezoning with 111 acres, and total fee was $8,500. The new proposed fee would be $10,050. This does not include the fiscal impact study that would be utilized for a large rezoning. As you can see based on the graph, some of the counties we are above and others we are below, and we tried to target the middle ground. Above is a comparable for a major subdivision final plat with 51 lots, previously a total fee of $3,800, an increase of $4,000 to $4,550. Also a construction plan for major subdivision with 23 acres, previously $6,750, is now increased to $8,600. Again, these fees are more expensive than some localities, but other localities are much higher. Again, these localities lower in cost, but also do not have an ENS or stormwater fee. Land disturbance permit agreement, which utilizes an agreement in lieu of plan, which is under an acre, will now cost $300. An erosion and sediment control plan for more than an acre is $850 plus $20 per acre. Grading permits show that the surrounding localities charge more for a grading permit than King George County. As previously stated, this fee has not increased in 15 plus years, and the proposed fee of $300 for grading permits is under 1 acre with $850 plus $50 per acre for acres disturbed for those disturbing more than an acre. And I'm open for discussion.
Questions? Mr. Bush, do you want to start again?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Heather. I think it's time to get us up to par. However, I do have only two that I would disagree with the rate. So residential permit fees, I'm looking at this from the aspect that if someone is doing a remodel of their home, they're adding to the value of their home. Therefore, their house is going to assess for more when taxes increase. So, they're going to be paying for that on the back end. That's revenues coming to the county. And being that it's residential, that's our citizens. That's not people coming to the county. That's people who currently live here who we serve. So I would just I like everything that was presented, but I would like to suggest two amendments to this. Under residential permit fees, remodel interior, I would like to strike the change from what was previously 15 cents, recommendation of increasing to 25 cents per square foot. I would like that to stay at 15 cents and not be increased. Also, addition to structure, again, that's enhancing someone's current residence. I would like that to also stay at 15 cents and not change to 25 cents per square foot. Besides those two changes, I appreciate all your work into this, and thank you very much. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender?
Yes, thank you. I want to commend you. This is very thorough, and I appreciate you and your staff coming up with this. It's a lot to digest at one moment, but I have two questions. What is the state levy?
The state levy is set by DHCD, and that goes back to the state. So that is only assessed for your building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. Is that wrong? Okay. Okay. So that is not assessed to your grading permit, your zoning permit, or any of the fees that come to the county.
All right, thank you. And then my last question is, how much, do you have an estimate of, by not updating these fees in 15 years, how much revenue we might have lost?
It's It's hard to determine because each application is different. Each house size is different. So we try to project based on how many we may receive, but where there's no way to calculate that I'm going to get a year full of 1,500 square foot houses or a year full of 4,500 square foot houses. Same with, I might have a rezoning for 1 acre or I might have a rezoning for 100 plus acres. It's just hard to calculate.
But we have lost some, you would say. We just can't have a definitive number.
Correct.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stonehill?
Very thorough.
Thank
Couple
you.
of-
It was a team effort. My entire department helped on this, so I do want to share the credit there.
Aaron, good, thank you. Just a couple of questions. GIS, so we were not charging to update that at all?
No, sir.
So Mrs. Kupka builds a new house and she gets charged for putting her address and property division adjustments, and she gets a $40 charge to update all that. What if they say no, we don't want to do that?
Well, they can't say no. So the short term is that they can't say no. But should Ms. Kupka decide to build a new house, she has to be assigned a 911 address. We do not assign a 911 address until the home is built. That is part of our building process. However, she would not be charged that $15 fee unless she were to change her property lines. Now, if she were to divide off a piece of her property for her child that may be grown at that time, then that fee would be associated then. That fee is also more for Hop Yard, for example. We pre-address all of those lots. There's a lot of legwork into making sure every one of those tiny lots are lined up on our planning tool and pre-planned out. And so that's where that $15 per lot is more likely to be seen. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. Out there.
It sounds right, Heather.
Thank you.
So this is just going to be added. This is just going to be an extra fee that's added in to do that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Find my other notes here. Fast track review, what is that?
That is Hop Yard again, for example. They build the same 6-8 homes in different variations over and over again. So what they do is they send those particular home sites ahead in advance, and they come and say, I'm building the Madison model with the sunroom bump out. So we've already done the plan review. We already know that they're meeting the building code, and so that gets them in and out the door quicker. We turn those permits around in days.
LBBCA.
Local Building Code Appeals.
Local Building Board
Code of Appeals.
appealed. Okay.
So if we wrote you a violation letter for your building code and you wanted to appeal the building official's decision, you would be heard by that board.
Okay. Miscellaneous fees. A tent.
Yes, so the Some Gave All, they put up a tent every year, or the large tents that you see weddings have, those often require a permit. We make sure that they meet the fire provisions, they have exits, things of that nature.
Have we been charging that fee previously?
Yes, sir.
I think that's it. I don't see Mr. Bush's flagpole fee, though.
Stand by, gentlemen, stand by. It's Mr. Granger's turn.
They're exempt now?
A flagpole is up to 30 feet. Is
30 feet. Okay. All right, that's all I have, and thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Granger.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ms. Hall, thank you for coming out and presenting a lot of numbers. Good information. Thank you for the packet of the other localities and how we compare. I will review that and enjoy it very much. So thank you. but I really do appreciate it, though. It helps me to understand. So thank you for providing that. I like the numbers and knowing where we stand. I'm going to ask some questions, and I'll probably sound foolish, but I'm just trying to better understand.
Mm-hmm.
So right at the beginning, we got application deposit.
Yes, sir.
New single-family dwellings or additions. So they're going to put down $500, and at the bottom it shows a little disclaimer saying these fees will be non-refundable and put towards the total fee due during the permit pickup process. Should an applicant abandon their project after review has been completed, the applicant will forfeit the costs. Understand? Makes sense. Does that include things like you're putting down $500 initially for, let's say you're doing a new deck?
No.
No. What is that? So what does additions mean? Is that like a new addition to the house? Like you're building a new room onto the house?
The thought is anything that we know is going to cost more than $500. So when you add on a room, a
Okay.
20 by 20 addition, that's a bigger cost. A deck, we're doing minimal work. These additions, the plan reviews, we're doing a lot of work,
Okay.
and then sometimes they never come back. So we're doing that work for free.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. I just saw additions. I didn't know what that classified as. So I appreciate that. That helps me a lot, understand a lot. My only other question. So I was looking at the fee schedule comparable by permit types. I can't tell you what slide it is. It's somewhere in the middle. It doesn't really help.
This one?
Oh my gosh, look at that. That's it. So I'm just wondering, I see Spotsy, Stafford, and the city of Fredericksburg have ENS. Is that erosion and sediment?
Yes, sir.
So they charge a fee for, what does that mean exactly for them? And is that something we need to worry about?
Spotsy, Stafford, City of Fredericksburg, and ENS fee is the same as our grading fee. They just call it something different.
Tracking. Okay. Awesome. I don't have any other questions. I am going to review the stuff though, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chapman, any questions? Thank you. Mrs. Huber? Mr. Say?
Couple quick questions. On the third-party fiscal impact study, it says that it often requires the county to hire a third party. Is that based on how busy the office is now, or whether you're going to contract out, whether you're going to do yourself? Because it kind of seems like it's kind of a roll the dice kind of thing about when I come in, if you're not busy, you're going to do it. It's not going to cost me.
No, it's not something that the staff would do. So a third-party fiscal impact study is when we have a large rezoning that has impacts to multiple departments. Our schools, our fire and rescue, our police, our department, our courts, every rezoning possibly has a large impact. So we learned this year that we had or these past couple years that we've had a large rezoning, and that cost the county quite a bit. We hired a third party to do that fiscal impact for, guiding the decisions of the board, as well as informing the public of what that proposed rezoning might incur. So we cannot control how much that fiscal impact study may cost. So we put that in there as a caveat so that cost, whatever it may be, would be passed on to the applicant. However, most often we rezone a small piece of property, like O'Reilly's, for example. When they came in, they did a rezoning. It was about an acre of land. We knew what they were going to use it for. They proffered and said, this is what we're asking for. We knew what those impacts were. It's when you get the large residential developments that you don't know, is this 100 new homes or 500 new homes? How is that going to impact the county? So it's a tool that everyone uses for their decision making.
Okay, so it is defined. It's not questionable as whether or not you're going to do that, but there is some way of saying, regardless if it's above this, above the size, whatever, we're going to contract it out. So it's not an unknown.
It's not an unknown, and it's not just my department that would make that decision.
Okay. And the only question is, and I know, as you say, we don't know how much it varies year to year of how much we're building and doing those kinds of things, but you have a rough idea based on 2021 or something that if we went with these fees, how much additional revenue that would generate for the county?
I did give you that one example for the single family dwelling. Let me pull that back.
But holistically looking across all these things, do we, if all these fees were adopted, And if we were going to do the same next year we did this year, do you have a rough idea of how much additional revenue across the board that would generate for the county?
Not, it's a very hard variable to find because here again, the variables of how big that house may be or how many acres might be rezoned or, you know, a special exception by event venue is required to have 20 acres, but if you utilize a special exception for a different use, you could do that on an acre and it may only be a couple $100s. So the variable is there's no crystal ball to say this is what's coming in. Um, I would be hard to give you a number. I can tell you they will certainly go up. I will tell you that we can compare what we did as far as single family with a medium-sized house and what that projection might be. But anywhere past that would be hard to define.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Thompson, any questions?
Just one. So just to be super clear, there's not a fee for using the GIS.
There's not a fee for using the GIS, and there's not a fee for any service that GIS department provides. So we are addressing each house. We're GPSing it. We're researching that deed book. We're not charging for that. We did show, you know, a lot of other counties, especially that have a GIS, which not every county has, is charging at least, if not more, than what we're asking.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Hall, I want to thank you and reiterate my colleagues' comments about the thoroughness of the information you provided tonight. We greatly appreciate it. I also want to thank your staff that came out, Mr. Herron and Mr. Conboy online. Thank you very much. Mr. Cusenberry, guidance for the board. Were you looking for adoption of this tonight, or is this just a preliminary presentation that perhaps we could take formal action at one of next month's meetings?
You could. This will, if you do want to make these changes, this will be part of the budget that you adopt for FY22. In fact, in our revenue estimates, we increased the revenue from this new fee structure by 25%. We think that's a very conservative estimate.
So what is the pleasure of the board? Mr. Granger.
I was going to ask if Mr. Bush could run by. He had a couple of. Yes. Could you? I would just want to hear him again.
Well, thank you very much, sir. So I was only looking for two changes, and it was specific to residential permit fees, because that's our current citizens. The logic was on remodeling, you're enhancing the value of your home. Therefore, on an assessment, you're going to pay taxes increased because of the enhancements to your home. So the county will be seeing that revenue just in a different form. So with that in mind, remodel interior finished, unfinished areas is being proposed for an increase to 25 cents from 15. I would like to see that remain at 15. Likewise, same thing for addition to structure, finished, unfinished areas under residential permit fees. The change being presented is to 25 cents. Or currently it is at 15. I would like to see that remain the same as well. That's the two changes that I'm proposing.
Could I ask Ms. Hall a question based on Ms. Hall? I'm sure it's probably not an absolute answer, but from the perspective of increasing those fees, I'm assuming it's to cover the costs of someone coming in to do those activities.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, it's a fee, like a fee for service. They're saying, I want this, you need to pay this many dollars for us to be able to do the work you're going to need us to do in order to allow you to do it. And so if we reduce it, I mean, it's something we could do, but then what we're saying is we're subsidizing with tax dollars. So everyone's helping out on that, as opposed to saying the individual who's coming in and saying, I have my home and I want to do an addition. We're basically saying, oh, that's fine. You want to do an addition. You're going to have to carry the burden of the cost to do that addition, which includes reaching out to community development and receiving the permits and having them review everything. And personally, I'm inclined to say, let's keep the fees. I like what you're saying, but then what you're saying is other taxpayers are going to subsidize them on that.
So can I counter that, Madam Chair?
You may.
Thank you. Not necessarily, because if you notice that, or what I'm trying to say is they are going to pay for it. So I'm not asking for a reduction. I'm asking that it not be increased. And the reason I'm saying that it's not going to be burdensome is because taxpayers are paying for community development and staffing, adding the new positions. Those revenues come from the major cash flow is our personal property taxes. So if someone is enhancing their personal property via this remodel, when their tax assessment comes up, they're going to be assessed higher because they increase the value of their house through the enhancements. Therefore, the money that they're paying to the county via personal property taxes, which is paying for the staff to do these reviews, that rate's now higher for them. So they're paying for that. You see what I'm saying? So I look, and the reason I specified residential is because that's a service that county staff is providing directly to our citizens. If it's a resident of King George County, you're a resident of King George County. And that's the logic behind my proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender?
I don't really have any comment. I'm still trying to absorb these numbers here.
Okay. Mr. Stonehill? Okay, so I'm with Mr. Granger on this one. I feel like this is a service that the Department of Community Development is bearing the cost to provide that service. While I understand your logic, Mr. Bush, that eventually their home will be reassessed at a higher level and then subject to higher tax, that it still bears a direct impact on the Department of Community Development. So I'm in favor for adopting the new fee schedule as it was presented. I'd like to hear from the citizens if you have any additional comments. Mr. Chapman? Ms. Huber? Mr. Say? Ms. Thompson? All right. So you were looking for some guidance tonight. So is there a motion?
So if we make a motion, are we locked in, or again, we could add, okay, so this is the high water mark, basically
Always
what we're saying.
lower it.
Okay, I would move to advertise the fee schedule for community development, fee schedule update as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr.
This is the high water mark and we're going to
Exactly.
advertise.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Thank you. Any further discussion?
I would like to make one. I'm just trying to absorb the numbers. I know that it's needed, and I know that it's been a long time coming. I just feel I need to immerse myself in the numbers to make sure that it's right. But since it's a high water mark, I can go along with it.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Thank you very much for the support.
What's that? I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say aye.
No, I actually wanted to say that I was not going to be ready to vote on this, that I needed to go over this again. So I'm going to.
Would you like to be recorded as abstain or nay?
I would say a nay.
Okay. All right. So I would direct the clerk to make sure the record reflects that. Thank you. All righty. Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Thank you.
And Mr. Clark, Department of Parks and Recreation fee schedule.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, citizen advisory members. Thank you for the opportunity to come tonight to discuss both Parks and Recreation rental fees as well as the proposed 4th of July event. We'll start with our rental fees. First, all the proposed rates have been reviewed by and given approval by the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. The current schedule of fees for the Citizen Center was approved in March of 2019. At the time of the review, other similar facilities in the area were compared. Today, we are proposing a reduction in the number of rental categories with some minor increases, which still keep us competitive as a competitive venue in terms of cost. We propose eliminating the presence of alcohol at an event and instead strictly base the rental category on the amount of the facility being used. Part of these increases are also based on the increases in minimum wage, which are effective May 1st of this year and January 1st of next year, which have caused an increase in all part-time salaries and part-time and seasonal positions within our department. A half hall rental would go to $50 per hour. A whole hall rental would be $60 per hour, which is the cap with a current event right now. And a parking lot only rental would be $40 per hour. The parking lot only rental would also include access to restrooms, which is a part of the increase in that cost. All rentals would have a $100 damage deposit, and for rentals that are serving alcohol, there would be an additional $100 alcohol deposit. Those events must also have a banquet permit from Virginia Alcohol Beverage Control. Field rental rates were approved in February of last year and went into effect July 1st of 2020. There's no change in those rates for this year. That's an activity fund category. In the other facility rate category, we propose a small adjustment to a few of them. These increases are designed to provide for replacement equipment to be funded by the users and not burden the taxpayer in the general fund. Equipment such as picnic tables, tennis nets, and windscreens will now be funded through the activity fund accounts rather than the general fund or capital improvement program. Rentals of the main gym at the middle school increased from $30 to $30, up from $25 per hour, due to the size of the facility and the added benefits of having more space to the user. A tennis court rental fee would be $10 per hour. That is a new fee. And the rental of a picnic shelter would be $10 per hour, which would be a new fee. For all rentals, there would continue to be groups that fall under our rental policy that would receive reduced or comped rentals, including county departments, the county schools, the Co-op Extension Office, and the Rappahannock Area Agency on Aging, to name a few. Tonight, we have two options for you. We can either adopt these fees effective April 1st for any rentals made starting July 1, or we can make them effective for any rentals made July 1 or later. So just whether or not tomorrow, if someone is calling, are we charging them a new rate if they have an August rental is the question. I'm happy to answer any questions on rental rates before we move on to the 4th of July event.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you for putting this together, sir. So I don't have a problem with the proposed fees. I guess the question would be, when do we want it effective? So we would have to advertise to adopt. So I would advertise these as our mark, like we're doing everything else, and to become effective for anything scheduled on or after 1 July.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bender?
I actually have a couple questions. First one is the tennis court. So is that anyone that uses it?
No, so that would be to have an exclusive rental. I don't anticipate that being done, but once we get through the capital improvement process and free up those funds and renovate the courts, if someone were to come in and say, hey, I want to rent the tennis courts for a club match, I don't know if we have a tennis club would want to book 3 of the courts to have exclusive use for a time, they would pay $10 an hour per court.
Okay.
At this time, I don't see that happening, but to have a fee that hopefully we would be able to recoup costs when that does happen.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. And then the last one is when you're talking about the picnic shelters, that's for an event, correct?
That would be, so comes in now, that came up with this past fall. We received a call one day, had a rental, the parking lot rental was a brand new fee we came up with. We had a political candidate come and say, hey, I want to rent the parking lot at the Citizen Center to have an event. And so we quickly came up with a proposal, but didn't weigh out all the other things, because in some events, if we have a full event, then we may limit the access to the Citizen Center. And so that's why that fee is raised to go up. In response, that following weekend, I happened to be at one of our parks, and we had another political candidate had booked the shelter. And so we had competing rallies, but we were not collecting anything on the picnic shelter side. And not that I'm trying to pick out one party over the other. It was kind of hard to say, ooh, I charged one party and I didn't charge the other. because we didn't have a fee there. In addition, if we break a picnic table right now, if one were to break something like any of those things, we have no money to recoup those, to go back and replace a picnic table. So either we go into the administration budget, which comes out of the taxpayers. Previously, they came out of the capital improvement budget, which a picnic table really is not a capital item. Or they would have to come out of our activity fund, which means people like basketball players and after-school kids are paying for picnic tables for a shelter. So not necessarily that we want to go this way, going with just the same way as all of our sports rental fees. Baseball players are now paying for baseball upkeep. Picnic shelter rentals would pay for picnic shelter upkeep.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I know a lot of people use it, especially when their kids play soccer. They might sit there while they're practicing. So I just wanted to
And
make
that's
sure.
the same thing. Yeah, no, yeah. It's like this past weekend, you go to any of the parks, people are hanging out. That's great. But if you want to have a birthday party and have exclusives right to that shelter, well, we're going to put up a sign and put you into the book that says, the Bender family has a shelter rented from 2 to 4 today for a birthday party. Then there's a fee associated with that cost.
That makes 100% sense. Thank you.
Mr. Stonehill?
Mrs. Bender cleared up my question on the tennis courts, and I'm looking at the pickleball net. So we rent a net if you want to go play pickleball. What is that?
Last summer I added 2 courts, overlaid 2 pickleball courts onto the 2 halves of the tennis courts that didn't have cracks. So we own nets now. No one has come to rent them yet, but you could come and rent that net for a day and then go set yourself up at the middle school and play, or between the middle school and high school, play on the tennis courts, and then bring that net back to us the following day.
And parking lot, yeah, I had a question on that, but I see that's the lot up over there. I have had a lot of people contact me and reference this new fee that we started last July about ball fields, and I had a number of citizens come and say, hey, we're born and raised 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation King Georgian, and I can't go play ball on a ball field without making a reservation. And I've heard a lot of grumbling about that. But you say we're not going to do any increases in that.
No,
for this year.
Yeah, that was a very big sticking point with a lot of the teams. It was a fee we'd never had. The surrounding jurisdictions all had one, and so we were actually attracting teams from out of the county because we were free. We have kept most of those teams because we are still, if not, for a lot of cases cheaper, but at least competitive with where they live, and they're still coming here to Sealston, especially to play. But it's allowing us to do upkeep and put more things into the fields. Just this past fall, one of the things, the L screen nets both were ripped at Sealston. So we had the frames were great, but the nets were ripping. And so we were able to use these user fees to replace the nets on these L screens to protect those that were out there pitching to their kids or pitching to their teams.
We put a lot of those together on Saturday.
Yeah.
But then that's also going to be like the tennis courts. That's only going to be for a function as opposed to 5 or 6 of us getting together for a little pickup, whatever, in an afternoon or something.
Yeah, it'd be only if you wanted to have exclusive use. For some reason you just tennis explodes in this county, and Saturday mornings are a very popular time. And we have dozens and dozens of drop-in players, and you said, hey, look, me and my 3 friends want to have this court from 10 to 12 exclusive to ourselves.
But I'm saying the same for the baseball fields, correct?
Yes. So yeah, well, I mean, right now there are very few open hours on any of our baseball fields because between Little League and our travel teams, they are booked. But on a Sunday afternoon, if you want to go up and grab a few buddies and hit, you can go up and hit. The policy is written that it's 15. If you have 15 people, it's a 12 or 15. It's either 12 or 15. It's on the sign. It's on the backstop. If you have 12 or 15 people with you, that makes it an organized practice that would need a reservation. And that was in the policy the board approved.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Granger.
I think everyone else got them. But Chris, thanks for coming out and being just a little bit lighter than community development's presentation.
I have a lot less categories than she does.
Fair point. Thank you.
All right, citizen questions, Mr. Chapman. Mrs. Huber, Mr. Say. Nope. All right then. Again, Mr. Cusenberry, are you looking for us to possibly adopt this? And it sounds like, I mean, I got to be honest with you. I don't think tomorrow is fair. So I'm in line at least with what Mr. Bush said. July 1 was what I was looking at. So are you looking for board approval for this tonight then?
That would be good, and the effective date being July 1.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move to authorize the county administrator to advertise the Parks and Recreation facility rental fees and charges as presented to take effect July 1st, 2021.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for all your work on this. And now I understand you have another presentation for us with regard to an event for next summer.
Yes, so within the Parks and Recreation Administration budget, we have a proposed 4th of July celebration to be held at Sealston Sports Complex. It would be similar to the 300th anniversary fireworks event that was held in November 2020. Parks and Recreation staff would operate this event. Our initial schedule is for the park to open with a vendor fair at 5 p.m., music starting at 5:30, and finish with fireworks at approximately 9:30. Food vendors, crafters, let's type something. Food vendors and crafters would be invited and would pay a fee to attend. We have a budget of $25,000 for fireworks, $6,000 for entertainment, and $9,000 for logistics, including stage, sound, lighting, parking attendants, and portable toilets, as well as a $600 line for overtime for general properties employees. The department would seek sponsors and vendors to assist with the costs, and those fees would be general fund revenue. These revenues would mostly, if not all, be captured in FY21, while most of the expenses would be captured in FY22. Tonight, the Parks and Recreation Department seeks consensus of the board on 1, the desire to have such an event, 2, the date of the event, as July 4th is a Sunday, so Saturday, the July 3rd would be an option, and 3, the budget for the event so that we can begin to contract with performers, logistical needs, and most importantly, the fireworks company. I thank you for your consideration of this event. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Love it. However, 2 things. I would actually like to see it take place on the actual 4th of July. It's a Sunday. It's still a weekend. I would like to see it take place. You mentioned Sealston, though, and I understand that worked for the 350th, but maybe if we could look at something a little more centric in the county, so like Sedell Brooks Park, it's more centrally located. And if we have overflow parking, like if we get, I'm sure a lot more people are going to be coming out now that COVID's kind of phasing out, maybe we can ask the sheriff or get permission from VDOT. I don't know what the technicalities are. Shut down that road. You could have parking over at King George Elementary, and something can be done. But I would like to see highlighting that park. Since we just highlighted Sealston, maybe we can move it to Brooks Park because of its central location. But love the idea. Just I would like to actually do it on the 4th of July itself.
For location, sir, I can. The biggest thing is per every inch of shell, we need 100 feet of clearance to the nearest structure. And so to launch at Sedell Brooks Park and use 6-inch shells, the spectators would not be able to be within the park. And then if we were to launch, say if we were to try to launch from Perkins Corner wastewater treatment plant, which would put us 600 feet maybe from the park, we then are probably within 600 feet of the sheriff's office and the animal shelter, and within 600 feet of a lot of homes. We went through a lot of hours. Dr. Young, Chief Moody, Mr. Miner, myself, all spent a lot of time with our contractor and with the fireworks company going over and over and over where to host the 300th anniversary event. We tried very hard to do it at the high school, and its location as related to Heritage Hall was an extreme concern to the residents and the director there. And so that's why we moved from the high school.
So I will rescind my suggestion, and I have no problem with Sealston. Thank you very much, but I still would like to see it take place on the actual 4th of July. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Bender.
I agree on the 4th of July. I want to say you guys did a great job in November, and a lot of citizens got a lot of hope from that event, and it was a pretty event, and people were so happy. And so I love the idea, and I know you put in a lot of work, because I was going to say that before you had answered, Jeff, that, that's just not feasible because of the clearance you need and all of that. But I think it's a great idea, and I hope we have even more than came out in November, but it was a great event.
Mr. Stonehill?
All for it. Last one was fantastic, like I said in the past, and it was one of the best fireworks displays I've ever seen. And I'm probably good with Sunday as well on the 4th proper.
Thank you. Mr. Granger?
Yes, ma'am. Chris, again, thank you for the presenting for it. It was a great event. I really liked it. I think a lot of the citizens that were able to come out and enjoy it really liked it. I would like to have it again, and I would concur with my colleagues. I'd prefer the 4th as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman? Mrs. Huber? Mr. Say? Ms. Thompson?
I have one, and I'm sorry if I missed this. What does the Christmas tree lighting have to do with it?
That line item in our budget is our special events category. That is, since we're on and we have that category in front of you, I'll be full. The Tourism Advisory Committee does not support the Christmas tree lighting event. It is not an event that they believe brings in tourists to our town. I agree with them. It was not something that we spent a lot of time with it. One of the things that we are looking at is that tree had seen better years. And so in discussions with General Properties, we have thought about what the cost would be possibly to replace that tree. But obviously we don't want to start with a 6-foot tree and try to light that. So to have something that be the right height. So looking for support within that budget for that event. Not with the goal of spending every penny unless there was reasons to do so. This past year we bought new lights, and we actually bought them out of the Recreation Activity Fund.
All right. And just since that was brought up, I just want to poll my colleagues real quick to make sure they're okay with that line item as well.
Absolutely.
Yes? Okay. All right. So do we need a motion for this tonight, Mr. Cusenberry? All right. And I will add, I feel like Sealstit, the fireworks, I echo Mr. Stonehill and Ms. Bender's comments. It was a fantastic event. There were cars parked all over the place. You didn't have to park at the school or at the park. There were people parked all up 218 and down Route 3, and they just found commercial parking lots to hang out in. And it was the ideal setup, and it's battle tested. I'm all for it, and let's do it July 4th. Yes, Mr. Stonehill.
Just make sure that once you get it all situated and settled, that you advertise it way out in advance.
Yes. Yeah, that's the good part with this one is knowing tomorrow that I can hit the office on April 1st, and we can work with the finance department to re-up the contract with the fireworks company, start working on the vendors that are coming and starting to advertise, and knowing that the location will not move 2 weeks before the event, we are in great shape.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for your time tonight. All right. So we're going to be moving on to number 7, Mr. Cusenberry, preliminary revenue, preliminary expenditures, general fund, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get started on that, to go back to Chris's item, that is in his budget already. But the problem is that in order to cover the funds, we need to do that this fiscal year. So we probably need to take that out of his proposed budget and appropriate some funding this fiscal year to take care of that.
Gotcha.
So at an upcoming board meeting, we'll bring it back an action item.
You'll bring it back again closer. Yep.
And we'll remove that from the FY22 budget.
Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
At the next work session, I'll be presenting a budget option now that we have the school number. I want to go over some things for the board that to let you know what I will be including in that proposed budget. Option. It's just an option. It's not a recommended budget. In human resources, we're reducing the request We're adding one part-time position, and we're going to remove the request for the software. The HR director is fine with this, and then we will reassess that next fiscal year and possibly add back the other position, or make this a full-time position in the next year budget. But that's what we're requesting for this upcoming fiscal year. In the Commissioner of Revenue, we are adding one position for the cigarette tax, and that position and the equipment will be funded from the cigarette tax revenue. In Community Development, we are proposing to add two new positions, as reducing the staffing request. And also, we're removing the request for professional services, and you'll see later we're adding a new position in the county engineer budget. For the sheriff, we're adding one new position in the equipment for the cigarette tax, funded from the cigarette tax revenue, adding the two courthouse bailiff positions. By adding the positions, he is able to reduce his part-time line item. And we also are including funding for recruitment and retention, and I'll go over that later. But the funding source for that, and also for the recruitment and retention in the EMS budget, will be the cigarette tax. In emergency services, we're proposing to add the 9 new positions budgeted for half a year, and that Chief Moody also recommends that. We also are including funding for the recruitment and retention. And Chris, can you go to the next slide real quick? This slide is a slide that Chief Moody presented at your last work session, and this is some things that he was recommended. The first one is to create a public safety pay schedule based on a step grade system. That will be included in the recruit and retention item. He's recommending to increase the certification pay amounts. That will be included. He proposed to increase the VRS multiplier 1.7 to 1.85. That actually took place this fiscal year. That was funded in this fiscal year budget. He's proposing some health insurance incentives. There are no health insurance incentives included in the budget option. And the market study every 5 years, well, that's fine. That certainly can take place. Go back, Chris. The previous slide. One more. Okay, so the cigarette tax. We're going to show $4 million in revenue in a cigarette tax. And where we are proposing to show that expenditure is the $1.25 million to fund the 2 positions, and also for the public safety recruitment and retention program, the step increase program. We're proposing $1 million to go to the revenue stabilization fund, and another $1 million to go in next fiscal year after this to get that back to where it needs to be. Then we're proposing $2.75 million to go for a general, just call it debt/capital fund for now. Just have a reservation of that funding to basically earmark it for future consideration where it specifically will go. Okay, so continue. In the budget option, we are including the increases that Department of Social Services Director has requested. We're including the increases for the Rappahannock Regional Jail and the Juvenile Detention Facility. We're adding the 1 new position in county engineering to offset that $187,000 number that was in community development. And like I said, this eventually will be your new county engineer, but this person will be doing stormwater and doing traffic and transportation. In the debt mitigation, the capital fund will show $2.75 million there. We're showing a health insurance decrease of 4%. I'm proposing funding included for merit increases and salary adjustment. Some positions need a salary adjustment of $280,000. The merit increases will go in effect on January the 1st. Of course, as we discussed, the landfill capital fund is lower from previous years because of the decrease in landfill revenue. And one thing that we are proposing to do is we've identified almost $310,000 of one-time purchases and proposing to use the general fund reserve to pay for those one-time purchases. In fact, what I used to do with Dr. Benson in prior years is to also look at his budget and identify one-time purchases that we could make for the schools out of the general fund reserves. And I talked to Dr. Benson at the break, and we'll do that again. We'll come up with a number and bring that back to you. And of course, the school division presented their budget tonight. So and this is where we are. In fact, in the school funds, you can add that $18.23 million number in there, and the increase would be about $750,000. So the big majority of the increases over the prior fiscal year is obviously schools, $750,000, the sheriff, almost $400,000, fire and rescue, $1.5 million, debt service, that's again for the additional debt associated with the courthouse, $537,000, and social services, $1.2 million. So when you take that 4.195 plus 750 for the schools, you almost have $5 million increase over the prior fiscal year. So how are we going to pay for this? Well, let's go to the next slide. In the revenue spreadsheets, and next meeting, we'll have those detailed 11 by 17 inch spreadsheets for the expense, showing the details on the expenditures and the revenues. But we're projecting in general property taxes an increase of almost $3 million, and that includes the 3-cent tax increase. The other local taxes, which include personal property taxes, we're projecting an increase of about $1.5 million. Cigarette taxes, we're going to show a revenue of $4 million. And then the other categories really didn't change a whole lot. One thing we will be showing in here is revenue from the general fund transfer to cover those one-time purchases for the county and possibly also the schools. So that could be, $600,000 or $700,000 there. And one thing that's not in this budget is any funding for the deputy county administrator position. Now, what you may want to do, what we did when Dr. Young was hired, at that time there was some talk about a deputy position also, and we recommended that the board allow the new county administrator to do an assessment of staff and see what his or her needs are, and then come back to the board at mid-year with recommendations for any adjustments or possibly a new position. Next slide, Chris. So again, you're going to get a lot more detail at your next work session on April the 7th to go over the schedule again. After that work session, we're hoping that the board will approve at your April 14th work session a public hearing advertisement to hold a public hearing on April the 20th, and for the board to adopt the operating budget on May 4th, and then to set the funding and the tax rates no later than June 30th.
Thank you, sir.
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Travis. I have one question. County Administrator Budget Option, page 6. Debt Mitigation Capital Fund. New funding, $2,750,000 from cigarette tax. So you're saying that would go to both. My concern is that every time we've looked at capital improvements, there's always been a long list and a small amount of money. If that money is sitting in capital improvements, it's going to get spent on capital improvements. I believe we instituted a debt mitigation plan. It worked. It's our policy. I think we should dedicate funds specifically to debt mitigation fund, get that policy back on track, and keep it separate from capital fund. I'd like to see that defined line. That's the only thing I have. Thank you.
Did you want to comment at all, Mr. Cusberry?
I think, looking back, I believe, was it $190,000 a year that you had in the budget for debt mitigation? I think I saw that. It
Sounds
was.
right.
So you may want to put 250,000 in here of that money for debt mitigation.
Very good. Ms. Bender?
I have a question on the cigarette tax. I know, Mr. Mayor, we talked about this before, and we get this, especially Ms. Kupka and I, who serve on the Service Authority, is, to help out some of that debt. And we had talked about maybe using a penny or so of a cigarette tax to put towards that to show, the county's trying to help the citizens.
That's certainly possible.
So I would like with my colleagues to have that discussion at one point, since this is not all allocated.
No, and in fact, by showing if you take 250,000 now and apply it for debt mitigation, that still leaves you $2.5 million that you could apply however you feel appropriate.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Stonehill?
That was my one of my questions was the debt mitigation. Was that going to go to our debt or to Service Authority? And, like I have been thinking all along, shaving part of that off to go to fire rescue incentive packages and stuff, part of that to go to our debt, part of that to go to Service Authority debt. Can we do that? Or is that lumped into debt mitigation?
The 250 I would expect would be county debt mitigation. Correct, Mr. Bush? So again, that leaves you $2.5 million. You could pull off part of that for Service Authority debt mitigation. You could also apply a portion of that to Service Authority capital projects.
I would certainly like to see that put somewhere, because I'm afraid, like Mr. Bush, that if it's here, we're going to end up, buying tires or, whatever that it's going to be used up for, where we have some, we have a great big hole we're trying to fill. And if we could get something to say, that's what we're doing with that piece of the pie, I would certainly like to see that, sketched out a little bit better if we can.
Again, I just need to know the amount.
I think that's it for right now.
Mr. Granger?
Yes, ma'am. Would you mind going to slide 4? I'm looking at the cigarette tax, and it says add revenue $4 million. And then when I add up those expenditures below it, I get $5 million. Am I wrong?
You're right. So that would be 1.75 for debt/capital.
Okay, just want to make sure I had that. Okay.
In fact, I kind of noticed that when I was going through it, that should have been 1.75.
Okay. Tracking. My only other question was, so for the budget comparison, it showed roughly a $1.5 million increase for fire and rescue. Is that assuming an increase of 9 positions for half a year?
Yes.
Okay, so then in the following fiscal year, we'd carry the burden of the. Okay, do we know what that? I know it was not all positions, but I mean that was a lion's share of it. What would be a loaded year's worth of
for those 9
fire and EMS 9 positions?
Yeah, let's go. It would be the difference between 6.671 million. Well, you take
times 2. So you take that
2.
difference and multiply by 2.
2.
Okay, so 4. Okay, so like 700,000-ish.
Ms. Hahn, do you want to clarify?
The figure, the 6.6 million,
Yes.
was figured at a whole year
Oh, that was figured out a whole year.
for the new positions.
Okay.
Correct. Correct.
Oh, so it's just the difference between those two. Okay. So it's about 375,000 for doing a full year of 9 positions. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chapman? Ms. Huber?
The only question I have is for the emergency services with the added 9. Is that also included with the step increase as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Say?
Yeah, just one question also on the EMS. Does the number that we've got in there, for retention, does that get the chief to where he believes he need to be to stop the erosion?
It does.
Those people, okay, thank you.
Ms. Thompson? Mr. Granger, did you have another question? You looked like something came to you.
It was circling in my head, Ms. Huber's question, just the number for the increase for the full year. I was like, well, it's only 370. So where's the extra $700,000 from this budget? But I know a lot of that's going to be with the increase in pay for the fee schedules or something along those lines, right? So
I have a question or maybe a request. Can you, is it possible that you run this 9 new positions and 6 new positions? Would you mind doing that? I'm just thinking in the back of my head, I know, and obviously it's not binding, but that SAFER grant request was for 6 positions. So I'd like a comparison so we can have a more informed discussion. Yeah.
So Ms. Kupka, are you asking for 6 or for 3 then? Because you're saying we would fund the other 3 if the grant covered 6?
No, I'm
like if we just did 6 total.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not counting for the grant. So, and I know it's hard to tell because 3 of them are lieutenants and then the other 6 are. So I know I'm opening a can of worms here, but I am.
Yes, that was my question. Do you want it run on, what numbers, how many staff, how many lieutenant? Because I can run the numbers. I just need to know which ones.
So can I poll my colleagues, please, for their desire? Mr. Bush? Are you looking at 9 new positions? Are you looking to fully fund the 9 new positions that were requested?
9 at this point, negative. What I recall was there was something that played into the timeline for the SAFER that we could not actually say that we were bringing on a certain number of positions because you couldn't have the positions identified before the grant was available or something to that effect. I know Chief stressed the 3 lieutenant positions, but I believe there was 3 lieutenant positions effective for July 1st, and then something about the 6 positions after the SAFER grant period, which I believe was January. I could be wrong, but I would like to defer to Chief because I know there was some maneuvering with those 9 positions, and he strategically had them timed out. But I do know he was looking for the 3 lieutenant positions for July 1st.
Ms. Bender?
Yeah, I had remembered the chief saying the 6 because he was concerned because of the retention issue that he would not be able to find 9 to fill. So start with 6. And then once the pay scale went up higher, we might be able to ability to retain those firefighters and find to fill 9. So I would be in agreement with 6.
Mr. Stonehill?
6.
Mr. Granger?
So if you're asking for 6, are you asking for which positions in particular? Because I think that's what Ms. Hahn was asking.
Right.
So if we were going with 6, I would say just obviously I'd defer to the chief to let him decide, but I would say at least 3 lieutenants and then, because my understanding is that lieutenants are still doing.
Part of the working group is how he described it.
They have all those skills plus the leadership aspect.
Right.
So I would say we'd want the lieutenant and then 1, was it like an EMS position, I think is what it was.
So, Mr. Kusenberry, can you just follow up with Chief Moody? But
and is that 6 positions for half a year? I think you should do that because it's safer grant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Because he said the timeline for that would be expected October, November.
Correct.
And then the funding would apply January 1st to the next. Yep. Yep. Thank you.
We'll go to the last slide, please. Oh, I wanted to show the, particularly for the committee, there was some discussion tonight about fund balances. The county has two fund balances. You have a general fund balance and you have a capital improvement fund, two funds that become fund balances eventually. So in the general fund, what this shows is that if you go to the top line, it says audited fund balance June 30th is $24 million. But you can see coming down that list what some encumbrances are to that fund balance. Carryovers, and Dr. Benson talked about purchase orders that may have been issued, things like that. In addition, by the county policy, we have 15% of the fund balance that is reserved per the county financial policies. So that's $13 million that is reserved per policy. And as your operating budget goes up, that reservation goes up. So it was estimated that at June 30th, 2021, we would have a little over $7 million in unencumbered fund balance. And that's going to increase this year because we're going to finish this year with a significant fund balance. On the capital improvement fund, it's really the same type of thing. And you have a audited fund balance of June 20th, 2020 of $22.7 million. Then again, you have some projects and some carryovers, and that's for construction projects that aren't complete, that the contractor's still working, the purchase orders are out there and been issued. And that number is going to increase because there's a couple of projects that we're currently working on where there was a lot more money encumbered and approved than is needed for the projects. So that $6.8 million number there at the bottom of the capital improvement fund will probably be over $9 million the next time you see it.
Questions, Mr. Granger?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, Travis, you said the general fund would be seeing an increase?
You will. At the next time you get the audit done,
yes,
fall, that number, that $7 million number will increase.
So I'm going to guess that had to deal with the CARES Act funding that helped to.
That's part, but also it's because the additional revenues you are seeing this year compared to what your budget expenditures are.
Tracking.
Both the county side and the school side. Dr. Benson talked that they were going to end this fiscal year with a surplus also.
So I'm just going to ask, because we used $1.6 million in revenue stabilization fund last year.
That's correct.
Would we, so, and I see in the proposed budget that you have here, or a budget option, $1 million from the cigarette tax to go to the revenue stabilization fund.
Yes.
Could we instead take it from the carryover funds and say, hey, you know, we said we're going to use a 1.6 million of revenue stabilization. We really didn't. I don't know what it's going to end up being.
Correct.
But pull it from there instead, or do you think that's a bad idea? What's your recommendation and why?
I wasn't sure either. We had a discussion earlier this week with Kyle with Davenport.
Okay.
And asked Kyle that question. And after he thought about it, he felt that the best place to replenish the revenue stabilization fund was from the cigarette tax.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. I don't know if that has to do with the bond agencies. We didn't go into too much detail.
Okay. That's good to know. I appreciate that. Thank you for asking those questions. That's really kind of where I was coming from. So thank you.
Any other questions from members? Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is good news, at least to me. The one thing that we didn't hear about was, so we know we have CARES funding coming to the county, a significant amount. Have you already started identifying any one-time purchases? Because obviously we don't want to use it for reoccurring cost. But have you started identifying things that might be in our budget this year to where maybe we can take down that number of what our preliminary budget is, because we can supplement that with CARES funding, kind of the same thing I was suggesting to Dr. Benson?
Not yet. In fact, we had a conference call with Kyle and Dan Siegel, the bond counsel, this afternoon regarding that subject. The only thing that's out there so far is just the legislation regarding the act and how much money is being set aside for each county. Good news is some jurisdictions, the amount appropriate to some jurisdictions changed. King George County still got 5.2 million, but it's going to be two different installments, one this spring and then one next year. So no, Davenport and the bond council, there's no information yet as to what that money can go toward.
Any other questions from citizens before we close out? So Mr. Kusenberry, you'd already reviewed, I know it says next steps, but in doing this, the prior slide had the next steps on it. Do you need to walk back through that again, or are we good to adjourn?
No, I think we have one more slide just telling you what was going to be on the agenda, what we're going to talk about at the next work session. Yes, next work session, presenting the operating budget option and also go over the Personal Property Tax Relief Act.
Go ahead, Mr. Granger.
Would we add on the board's budget requests for travel? Because I know that we were, most of us were delinquent on providing those initially, but just to give the citizens obviously an opportunity to see it and try to be as transparent as possible.
Go ahead, Ms. Hahn.
We've actually gone ahead and added it in, but if you want us to bring that, we didn't receive anything from Mr. Stonehill, so we mirrored some of the others, and we put in, was it Mr. Stonehill, Mr. Granger? We mirrored Mr. Granger, and then Mr. Stonehill. Yes, we mirrored yours for Mr. Granger's for Mr. Stonehill, and then we put in the new supervisors from what the previous was, and then we took what Ms. Bender had previously for the NACO conference that was not in Ms. Kupka's.
And just so everyone's tracking, they've now announced where the NACO conference will be. Prince George's County, Maryland. So I will not be incurring any airfare expenses. Let me state that for the record, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
I would have went to
Lucky me.
Orlando.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn until Tuesday, April 6th at 6:30 p.m. in the boardroom.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned.